Chapter 219, Soul and Introspection. In the room of requirement, Avery and Alex were still sparring with the training dummies. They had been at it for nearly a month, and the progress was obvious. Now the two of them could withstand 15 minutes of the dummies' relentless assault. A month ago, they would have been floored in 3. The price was exhaustion. After each session, they collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, limbs refusing to obey. But young wizards recovered quickly. They trained for 2 hours every night, fell flat on their backs 3 or 4 times, rested, rose, and continued until they collapsed again. Hermes trained alone across the room. He didn't join the others. His level was far enough ahead that paired practice would be pointless. He had taken Regulus's advice and stopped obsessing over killing an opponent with a single spell. Instead, he worked on combining high-powered dark arts with minor charms, how to link them, synchronize them, and make defenses fail. He moved fluidly through the dummies. A bone and blood stripping curse pushed back 3, followed by a silent binding to seal 2 more, then a Tarantallegra to force others to dance, and finally an Expelliarmus. The sequence was so smooth, the dummies couldn't react in time. Regulus paid them little mind. They were old enough to discipline themselves. He couldn't micromanage their training forever. If they were willing to work hard, fine. If not, he wouldn't force them. For now, things looked promising. At the far end of the training ground, in a small, soundproofed room, Regulus sat cross-legged. The walls closed in, muffling the noise, and he closed his eyes, sinking his consciousness inward. His mental landscape unfurled. 6 stars hung in the void, slowly rotating. Betelgeuse burned in the distance, orange-red, explosive, raw power. It was eruption, the impulse to tear everything apart, restrained within the star orbit so it wouldn't spiral out of control. Rigel guarded the center, silver-white, gentle but immovable. It was the boundary, the bottom line, the unshakable I that everything else had to flow around. Orion's belt formed a line, rotating through the middle, order, connection, the rule that let all the stars find their places. Without it, the conflict between Betelgeuse and Rigel would tear the system apart. Sirius sat in the lower right, faint and thin, barely glowing. Regulus looked at Sirius with a steady heart. It had been less than a week. No change yet was to be expected. The duel for the prefect position would need time to ferment for its effects to take hold. He withdrew his gaze and turned to the small, glowing figure that had recently appeared in his inner world. Ever since it had become visible, he couldn't let it sit passively. He felt compelled to do something with it. But first he had to determine what could and couldn't be done. Some things were forbidden and obvious. Anything Lord Voldemort had done was not to be touched. Tom Marvolo Riddle, by this point in the timeline, he should already have created 5 Horcruxes. The diary, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, and Ravenclaw's diadem. Splitting a soul 5 times and still maintaining a human form was already a dark miracle. Perhaps, Regulus thought, the current Voldemort no longer looked very human. Immersed in the dark arts for so long, he would have actively shed the human traits of his Muggle bloodline, trying to become the ultimate pure-blood wizard, a living embodiment of the snake totem. Regulus imagined pallid, scale-suggestive skin, a flattened, snout-like nose, slit pupils, closer to serpent than man. Even if he hadn't reached Voldemort's later, fully inhuman state, he was likely far from human. A fragmented soul affects the body. This was common magical knowledge. In his pursuit of immortality, Voldemort had torn his soul into pieces and hidden them in objects, and in doing so had steadily undermined the stability of his physical form. It was a crooked path from the start. The Bloody Baron had once said a complete soul is the best defense. Regulus could not imagine doing otherwise. An incomplete soul was like a house missing a load-bearing wall. No matter how magnificent it looked on the surface, a single storm could bring it down. Voldemort's choices were not ones Regulus would consider. They weren't even remotely relevant. As for transcending death, an emotion Regulus found difficult to relate to welled up in him. Voldemort feared death with a madness that made him tear his soul apart to escape it. Regulus could understand the fear, but he could not empathize. His own approach to death was simple: don't let anyone kill you. He was 12. Death felt distant and not worth agonizing over. Thoughts of transcending death could wait until he had lived a long life. When the time came, centuries hence, there would be methods. The wizarding world was vast, and he had already seen a broader view of existence. He shook his head and pushed Voldemort from his thoughts, returning to the small glowing figure. It stood motionless, an exquisite ornament of light. Its mere existence had value. It looked like what a soul should, whole, solid, luminous. Regulus kept that image as a standard. If his own soul ever deviated, deformed, or became contaminated, he could compare it against this ideal. But beyond existing and reflecting, the figure seemed to have no function, at least none he could see. Another thought seized him. What if it could grow? What if he could strengthen it at the soul level, make its light brighter, its form more substantial, its inner core more powerful? What would soul strengthening bring? Greater spellcasting ability, deeper magical insight, stronger mental defenses, sharper magical perception, more stable magical control. Books hinted that the strength of a soul set a wizard's ceiling. An impressive soul could bear more complex magical constructs. It sounded plausible, but it was vague. How strong was strong? What did it mean for a soul to carry magic? These were questions that could only be answered by experiment. First, then, how to make it grow. If magical energy flowed toward it, would it absorb that energy? Regulus summoned a thread of magical energy and guided it to the little figure. The energy approached, but the figure did not react. He brought the thread closer, and it passed straight through the light, as though through a translucent orb, leaving nothing behind. He withdrew the energy, so that wasn't the way. What about a piece of his own spirit, something forged and tempered through star orbit meditation? He separated a wisp of spirit and sent it out. The result was the same. The spirit passed through without effect. It was as if the figure existed in another dimension. Neither magical energy nor spirit could touch it. Regulus frowned. Then what did it rely on to grow? Would it strengthen on its own, slowly, like his own magical and spiritual growth during star orbit cycles? Maybe, but he saw no evidence of change. His thoughts wandered to his ancestor, Regulus Black, who had lived to 137 and descended into madness. Regulus had left a warning in his notes. The container is too solid, and the thing inside cannot get out. I have trapped myself. Regulus thought the deduction reasonable. Perhaps Regulus had overstrengthened his body, made the container too rigid, and in doing so had trapped his soul, preventing normal interaction with the outside world and eventually causing mental collapse. What method Regulus used was unknown. Perhaps a potion, an invented spell, some magical experiment. Regulus didn't know how far body strengthening had to go to trap a soul, only that a critical point must exist. That line of thought led him deeper. Besides leaving the body at death to pass through the veil, could a soul voluntarily leave a living body? Voldemort's Horcruxes didn't count. Those were partial removals, not complete departures. Regulus meant a whole, intact soul temporarily leaving a living body. If it could, what could it do? Travel like a Patronus? Pass through matter like a ghost? What would become of the body, sleeping, its consciousness blank for a while, or catatonic and unresponsive? Could a soul truly transcend its body and act externally? He had no answers. The questions touched fundamental aspects of magic. Perhaps even Dumbledore and Voldemort had not fully unraveled them. Still, he couldn't stop thinking. He thought of Horcruxes again. Voldemort treated the soul as a tool, tearing it apart and stuffing the pieces into objects to elude death, a path that only made him more fractured and weak. If a Horcrux was an object carrying a soul, was the reverse conceivable? A soul carrying an object? Could a soul bear the weight of an object within it? If an item entered a soul, would it alter the soul in turn? Pushing further, could one nurture an item within a soul, letting both grow together? A symbiosis where the strengthening of the soul bolstered the item and vice versa. He didn't know. One thing was certain, though. If such feats were possible, they would demand a soul robust enough to sustain them. These thoughts circled and deepened until a realization came. Whether he was thinking of feeding the soul to make it grow, of the soul leaving the body, or of housing an object inside the soul, everything pointed inward. It was about exploring the self, strengthening the core, making the inner essence more solid, brighter, and more powerful. But it was premature to solve all of that at once. First, he should try raising that little light, find a way to nurture it, and how to do that, he would have to continue thinking. Chapter 220. Sirius discovers the key point. The second Wednesday of October, early morning. The castle lay wrapped in mist. From the classroom windows, the Black Lake's surface shivered a gray-white. Third years filed into transfiguration, Gryffindors and Ravenclaws finding their places. Sirius went to the row by the window and sat in the second-to-last seat. He put his bag on the desk, took out his wand, and began to twirl it between his fingers. James slid in beside him and shoved over. Move. Sirius couldn't be bothered. Only after James jabbed him with an elbow did he shift an inch. Remus sat on James's other side, textbook open and head bowed over it. Peter huddled in the back corner. "I heard we're doing something new today," James whispered, leaning close. "McGonagall mentioned something last week, complex transfiguration." Sirius kept twirling his wand, staring out at the lake. He said. James was not satisfied and jabbed him again. "Don't you want to know what it is?" Sirius put the wand down and turned to him. "If you want to know, listen later. Don't ask me." James curled his lip. "You're so boring." A few minutes later, McGonagall swept in and the room fell silent. She went to the lectern, expression severe, emerald robes immaculate, hair pulled back tightly. Today, complex transfiguration. She flicked her wand and several ordinary stones on the desk rose and hovered. Turning a stone into a cup is first-year work. You learned that. But that was simple transfiguration. Once transformed, the cup was just a cup. A stone dropped onto the desk and began to change. Its edges folded inward, the base bulged, the top stretched. In a few seconds, a white ceramic cup sat on the desk, handle smooth, rim even. McGonagall tapped it lightly with her wand, and it began to move. It circled the desk, took a few steps forward, then returned to its place. A second stone transformed into an identical cup, then continued changing. Its body shrank, the handle vanished, the bottom formed claws, a head sprouted from the top, gray feathers spread across the smooth ceramic, wings unfolded, and a tail formed. A gray pigeon beat its wings, flew once around the classroom, and landed in her hand. "This is complex transfiguration," she said. "From inanimate to inanimate, inanimate to animate, a sequential transformation." Her gaze swept the room. "Today's exercise. Step 1, turn a stone into a cup that can hold water without leaking. Step 2, make the transformed cup move of its own accord. Step 3, change the cup into a pigeon that can fly." She flicked her wand, and a gray stone appeared on every desk. "Begin." Sirius looked at the stone in front of him. Stone, cup. He pictured the shape of a cup, tapped his wand, and the stone shifted. A few seconds later, a well-formed white ceramic cup sat on the desk. Smooth handle, even rim, balanced body. He picked it up, checked it, then set it down. McGonagall happened to pass and paused. "Acceptable, Mr. Black. Proceed to the next step." Sirius tried to make the cup move. He waved his wand and said the incantation, but it stayed still. He tried again, louder, and it wobbled an inch to the side and stopped. James leaned over with advice. "You said it too fast and too quiet. The cup can't hear you." Sirius pushed his arm away. "Finish yours first before you start lecturing me." James shrugged and winked at Remus. Sirius stared at the cup, thinking. A cup is made of stone. A stone cannot move. The form of a cup carries no motion by itself. How had McGonagall made hers move? The cup must have been given a will, he thought, not an external addition, but a will inherent to the form. He lifted his wand and gave it a light flick. The cup moved. It was as if something inside supported it. It stood on the desk, took a step, then another. James's eyes widened. "Blimey!" Sirius ignored him. The cup walked across the desk and back again, swaying but never toppling. He relaxed. He made it dance, spin, sway, slide forward and back until it came to him and bowed as if asking him to dance. McGonagall watched from the lectern. The cup kept twirling under her eyes. She came over, stood by the desk, and beamed. "Very good, Mr. Black. You understand that vitality can be inherent in form itself. It need not be grafted on from outside." Sirius nodded, still staring at the cup. McGonagall lingered. He knew why. Step 3. Cup to pigeon, the hardest part. A cup is dead. A pigeon is alive. The cup could be made to move, but becoming truly alive was different. What did it mean to turn a dead shape into a living creature? He thought suddenly of Remus, what it must feel like when he changes into a werewolf and back. That wasn't transfiguration. It was a curse, a kind of contagion. Still, there might be something in common. a knowledge of what one will become, then the change follows. He thought of Regulus, too, what the younger Black had done on the train last year, catching a spell mid-flight and freezing it. Regulus's control had seemed to transcend normal casting, an understanding of spells that surpassed James by leagues. Sirius realized now what that method was, control at a different level. He knew it in theory, but couldn't do it. That kind of mastery wasn't something a young wizard normally achieved. Pushing the thought aside, Sirius concentrated on transfiguration. If spells could be manipulated that way, he lifted his wand, didn't speak an incantation, and pictured a pigeon in his mind. Gray, with black flecks on its wings like the birds at Grimmauld Place, cooing on the eaves, waddling through the street, loud wing beats on takeoff, though messy, as his grandmother liked to complain about Muggles' animals and their poor hygiene. The corner of his mouth twitched. He wanted to laugh. The cup began to change. The body shrank, the handle vanished, claws pushed out at the base, a head formed at the top, gray feathers spread across the ceramic, wings unfolded, and a tail developed. A pigeon stood on the desk, cocking its head, its eyes dark and round like black beans. It beat its wings, flew once around the classroom, and returned. Sirius watched, still turning over the question in his head. If it were living, would it also leave a mess? He glanced at James with a sly look. James stared back, mouth open. Sirius raised an eyebrow. Nah, he thought better of it. His pigeon looked like a pigeon on the outside, but lacked a full biological interior. It couldn't eat, drink, or relieve itself. But then again, if something decent came from the right direction and landed on James's head, who could say it wasn't pigeon droppings? The corner of Sirius's mouth lifted. James glared. What are you grinning at? You should thank me, Sirius replied, mock-righteous. The pigeon circled once and perched on Sirius's desk, cooing twice. McGonagall watched with evident pleasure. She looked from the bird to Sirius. Two Black brothers, both had natural aptitude for transfiguration. The elder had suddenly performed this triple step, and he had done it well. Regulus, on the other hand, had asked probing questions. Could spells be transfigured? Can natural phenomena be transfigured? Can space be transfigured? What is truly untransfigurable? The hint of spatial transfiguration was beyond talent, as normally understood. Comparing them was meaningless, but it's always satisfying to see a student excel. With a flick of her wand, McGonagall changed the pigeon back into a stone. Very good, Mr. Black. 5 points to Gryffindor. Applause and whistles went up. James clapped Sirius on the shoulder. When did you learn to do that? Sirius shrugged with a touch of arrogance. I've known for ages. Just showing you now. He kept staring at the stone, thinking about that sensation. He willed it, and it changed. The bell rang. Students packed their things and filed out. Sirius put his books away and was about to stand when McGonagall called, Mr. Black, stay. James mouthed, You're done for, and winked. Sirius rolled his eyes, set his bag down, and went to the lectern. McGonagall sat behind it and gestured for him to sit. He sat, feeling a flicker of nervousness. When McGonagall summoned him, it was usually for being late, unfinished homework, or a prank. But he'd done well in class, so it couldn't be a scolding. He waited. There are different kinds of talent in transfiguration, McGonagall said. Some are excellent at precise control, some at rapid transformation, others at maintaining stability. Yours is a kind of intuition, a morphological intuition. You can see what an object should become and make it take that form. That isn't taught, it's innate. Sirius blinked. Morphological intuition? McGonagall continued. Do you remember last semester when I asked someone to turn a matchstick into a needle and then back? Sirius nodded. Reverse transfiguration. Young Mr. Black turned an oak matchstick into a linden matchstick in front of the class, she said. Hearing the name Regulus made Sirius's expression shift. Why mention his brother? McGonagall went on. Do you understand what that implied? Sirius shook his head. That wasn't transfiguration, McGonagall explained. It was conversion, changing the substance itself. Oak to linden, the material changed, but the object remained a matchstick. He altered what it is, not just what it looks like. She looked at Sirius. What you did today is the reverse. You altered what it looks like, the form, but you didn't alter its essence. The stone remained a stone. It temporarily became a pigeon. Sirius felt like scratching his head. He understood the distinction, though he hadn't thought about it during the spell. A thought popped into his mind. Between Regulus and him, whose ability was more impressive, McGonagall seemed to read him. The two of you excel in different directions, you in morphology, he in altering essence. Neither is better, just different. Sirius wanted to argue. The ability to change essence seemed clearly superior, but McGonagall was not there to compare. Her purpose was to affirm his talent and encourage him. She pulled a book from a drawer and placed it on the desk. Advanced Transfiguration, The Limits of Form. There are sections you may not understand yet, but begin reading. If you have questions, come ask me. He took the book. The cover was deep green with gilt lettering. Inside, complex diagrams of transfiguration were densely annotated. "Thank you, Professor," he said, grateful and a little puzzled at being treated like a talented student. McGonagall nodded. "Off you go." At the door, she called after him, "Oh, one more thing, Mr. Black." He turned. Her expression was calm. "When young Mr. Black was in his first year, he asked me this question. Can 18 and Diamond be transfigured into each other?" Sirius froze. He knew diamonds. He didn't know what teen stood for. Why did it matter whether they could be transfigured into one another? What would that explain? McGonagall said nothing more. Her look indicated he could leave. He pushed the door open and stepped into the busy corridor, the book hugged to his chest, and headed for the Gryffindor common room. At the fat lady's portrait, he gave the password and ducked inside. James and Remus were by the fire. James waved. What did McGonagall say? Sirius held up the book. James's eyes widened. Advanced Transfiguration? She gave that to you? Sirius raised an eyebrow. James whistled softly. Not bad, Sirius. You'll be a master of transfiguration yet. Remus smiled but offered no comment. Sirius sat on the sofa and opened the book. Regulus's questions about talent, deep practice, finding one's direction, flitted through his mind. So this is my talent, he thought. Another full moon night. Regulus stood atop the astronomy tower, the early morning wind whipping his robes until they snapped. It had been a month and a half since term began, and one thing had become clear. Inside Hogwarts, integrating protective imagery into space magic was impossible. He had tried countless times in the room of requirement, extracting protective imagery from his mental world and attempting to weave it into space itself. Space ignored him, as if it could not perceive his intentions. He tried other approaches. If merging failed, he attempted infiltration, slowly seeping in like water into stone. Still nothing. Theoretically, it should work. Protective imagery can merge with spells, so why not with space? Protection is a boundary. Space is a boundary. Placing the imagery of protection into space should make space an extension of that protection. Yet the room's space simply did not react. No refusal, only silence. Regulus thought about it a long time. The room of requirement was left by Lady Ravenclaw. Of course, something that came from a founder of her caliber would not be simple. Perhaps the space had a will he could not perceive. If it would not work there, he tried the astronomy tower. Same result. No active resistance, just an odd sense of speaking into air that had an unseen master. That avenue was blocked, at least here. Maybe elsewhere he could succeed, but within Hogwarts it was a dead end. Still, being stuck wasn't the end of the world. He had set several goals this semester, with space magic the priority. Space Leap, Space Anchor, Spell Leap, Spatial Transfiguration, the Spatial Network, all were progressing steadily. Combining protection and space was only one branch, a way of turning space itself into a shield, constructing an absolute barrier, folding oneself into another dimension, anchoring location, so no attack could displace you. He had even considered partnering with space the way a Patronus cooperates with its caster, rather than dominating it. Conceptually, it was an advance from mere manipulation to integration. The missing piece made his plan feel incomplete, but it could be filled in another way. It didn't have to be space magic. He could not leave his hands empty. He looked at the sky. The moon hung round and bright against the velvet night, flooding a small area of sky with pale light. He watched it for a long time, mind empty. Below, a few figures crossed the Hogwarts lawn. James, Sirius, and Peter had slipped out again. Regulus glanced down, then turned his attention back to the moon. A thought that had flitted through his head during last semester's Defense Against the Dark Arts class returned. Light source magic. What is light? Physically, It is an electromagnetic wave with wavelength, frequency, and speed. Wavelength determines color, frequency determines energy. Could magic manipulate light? Lumos made a ball of light to brighten things, but what he wanted was control in the truest sense. Ideas exploded in his head like fireworks. Slow down light. Critical light. Light slows in a medium and returns to full speed in a vacuum. If light could be made to hesitate at a boundary, its speed would remain below normal. Wrap a spell in such critical light and its speed would plummet, making it easier to dodge. Entangle light. Entangled light. If two photons were bound, their states would be linked. Keep a spell attached to your own magic in that way, and wherever the spell went, it would move with you. A stray shot could be pulled back with a thought. Compress light. Compressed light. The shorter the wavelength, the higher the photon energy. Compress visible light into ultraviolet and it burns skin, into X-rays and it penetrates walls, into gamma rays and atoms lose their electrons on impact. Interfere with light. Phase light. Waves have peaks and troughs. When two beams meet, they brighten if peaks align and cancel if they're offset. Put yourself into destructive interference and light would flow around you. Be unseen. Cancel the interference and you'd reappear. Fission light. Fusion light. Make light an energy source. Force atomic nuclei to fuse under extreme heat and pressure. The emitted light carries destructive force and matter simply vanishes where it strikes. He stood there, bathed in moonlight, his mind full of light, but it was too far away. Each of those ideas required a deep grasp of light's essence. He couldn't even perceive the magic of light yet, let alone manipulate photons. Perhaps he would have to wait until Regulus or Sirius were lit, only then could he see what light actually looked like. He shook his head and set the thoughts aside for now. Below, the trio were still skulking toward the humping willow. Regulus watched them a moment, then a different impulse took hold. He didn't want to work on light tonight. He would go to the forbidden forest instead. He stepped off the tower, robes flaring, cast a flying charm, and set off, uneasy but determined, toward the trees. He landed in a part of the forbidden forest that wasn't too deep. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the canopy, cutting patches of pale and shadow on the ground. A herd of thestrals stood in a nearby clearing. A few of the closer ones turned their heads and stared. Their eyes glowed a hollow, pupilless white. Regulus met their gaze. Thestrals, able to fly through storms, break magical barriers, and supposedly even take brief steps across space. He wanted to try it, not for research, but simply to ride and taste that flight. He took a few steps closer. They didn't flee, but neither did they approach. One raised its head and looked at him again. Regulus hesitated. How to communicate? He didn't know. But thestrals see death. Only those who have witnessed it can see them. Maybe that shared truth was enough to form a bond. He reached out and placed his hand on one's back. Its skin did not recoil. The texture was odd, rough like old bark, but warm. He released his magic as a greeting, letting it flow around the thestral without intent. The creature raised its head, then folded its forelegs and hind legs in the mounting posture of a horse. Regulus blinked, then impulsively vaulted onto its back. The thestral's forelegs pushed off, its body leaned forward, and its membranous wings snapped open. Takeoff. Wind roared in his ears, the trees shrinking into shadows, the ground slipping away. The thestral burst through the canopy and shot into the night, gaining speed at a pace far beyond a flying charm or any broom. Regulus felt the air as a blade across his face. He wanted to cast a shield, but he held back. He didn't want to miss the raw sensation. They flew over the forbidden forest, over the Black Lake, and over the castle grounds. Moonlight poured from above, and all of Hogwarts spread beneath them like a sleeping map. Then the thestral began traversing space. One wingbeat or step and the world shifted. One moment they were above the castle grounds, the next over an unfamiliar forest. With another stride, they were somewhere else entirely. After several such leaps, Regulus's sense of direction vanished. He felt space itself tug and slide. Each flap caused the surrounding space to recede, and as the space receded, they moved forward. This, he realized, was the thestral's way of traversing. Before he could process it all, the thestral suddenly dove and landed in a forest so unfamiliar and dense the night was nearly total. It shook, and Regulus was thrown off, stumbling to his feet. The animal let out a low, rasping neigh, spread its wings, and flew away into the dark, leaving him alone. He stood there, speechless. It had just left him. Had he done something wrong? He looked around. Tall trees, thick foliage, moonlight barely penetrated. He was deep in the forbidden forest, but unsure exactly where. The Thestral's space steps had scrambled his bearings. He cast a flying charm, rose above the treetops, and searched. A faint light far off, probably the direction of Hogwarts, was visible, but so distant it required squinting to make out. He landed and considered apparition, but another thought came. That speed on the Thestral, that freedom. He wanted it again. Flying charms were too slow, his broom wasn't with him, and Voldemort-style flight without a vehicle was beyond him. Physics, however, could help where his raw magic lacked. Speed, altitude, endurance. Physics could push those to limits. It lacked flexibility, but in pure performance, it might be superior. He began to conceptualize. First, a shell, a shield charm shaped into an aerodynamic form instead of a sphere. Control would come from his magical perception and manipulation, but he needed auxiliary spells. Shock absorption for high acceleration, a silencing charm to remove air friction noise so he wouldn't draw attention. He set to work. He cast a shield charm and let his magic spread from within. As he injected more magic and shaped it, the form changed. The front elongated into a streamlined, pointed nose. The sides thinned and extended into a pair of short, subtly curved wings. The rear contracted into a narrowing, trumpet-like nozzle. He didn't copy any specific model, just basic aerodynamic logic, a sharp nose to cut the air, a smooth fuselage, and a rear opening for propulsion. Now for power. With a thought, a wisp of orange-red fiendfire kindled silently at the nozzle. He constrained it firmly with his will, controlling its temperature and stabilizing its form. The fiendfire burned steadily inside, heating gas that gushed out the tail. Thrust transmitted through the magical shell to the body within. It was effective but diffuse, so he adjusted the magical channels in the nozzle, concentrating the combustion and tightening the jet. Thrust rose markedly, though direction still wavered. At the wingtips, he fashioned two fine-tunable auxiliary nozzles with magic for balance and steering. He applied the shock-absorbing and silencing charms to himself, calibrated his magical links, and climbed to a safe height. Then he lit the engines. Fiendfire from the main nozzle and the two aux jets erupted together, and the shell and he were pushed forward. The initial motion was gentle, like a pull. He increased his magical input steadily. The fiendfire burned hotter, the jets sharpened. Thrust kept rising until a violent surge flung him forward. Speed leaped to an incredible level in an instant. Air hit like a wall, but the sharp nose forced it aside with a low roar, muffled by the silencing charm. The shock absorber held as forces threatening to crush his organs pressed him back in the shell. Regulus gritted his teeth, steadied his mind, and poured in more magic. Trees blurred into gray-green streaks, details lost. He abandoned sight and relied on magic perception, scanning ahead like radar while fine-tuning his magic to steer. Speed climbed, 1,000 kilometers per hour, 1,100, 1,200. The shield shell began to vibrate, hissing as it tore through ultra-fast air. Surface ripples showed the strain. He knew he was approaching the limit, near the speed of sound, and if he pushed farther, the shell might disintegrate under structural overload. He held the output steady. He tore over the black forbidden forest. Startled nocturnal creatures flickered at the edge of his perception. The experience was strange and pure, everything reduced to direction, speed, and obstacles to avoid. Minutes later, the outline of Hogwarts appeared. He angled toward the forest's edge and gradually reduced his magical input. The fiendfire dimmed and his speed dropped. He shifted from level flight to a slow glide. On landing, the shell touched down, bounced, and dissipated into silver specks. Using the momentum, he jogged a few steps to steady himself. He panted, every part of him ached. Muscles trembled, bones groaned, his organs felt shifted, sweat drenched his hair. Yet he raised his head and an involuntary smile spread across his face. He straightened, stretched his neck and shoulders, and walked toward the lights of Hogwarts. That construct had been extraordinarily fast, primitive, violent, almost frenzied propulsion, but exhilarating, and it could go faster. Chapter 222, Voldemort, I Want You to Fly With Me. Regulus returned to his dormitory, washed up quickly, and felt refreshed. His body had mostly recovered. He lay in bed but couldn't sleep. Emotionally, he had calmed, but his body still remembered the sensation from moments earlier, the crushing pressure of being driven against his back by a violent force, the roar of air tearing past his ears, the sheer speed that turned everything before his eyes into a blur of light and shadow. It was intoxicating. He had experienced several kinds of spatial travel before. Apparition felt like being squeezed through a rubber tube and popping out on the other side. A portkey dragged you like a hook. Traveling by Patronus wrapped you in a warm, glowing cocoon. Each had its own wonder, but none were like what he'd just felt. This was using his own power to propel himself toward the speed of sound, his organs pressed hard against his spine by inertia while the world dissolved into streaks. Humans are born with a craving for speed and for flight, and wizards were no exception, at least not him. It was just that wizards had so many shortcuts. Apparition took you there in a single step. Broomsticks were leisurely, and the flying charm was wobbly. Few had tried to tear a hole in the air with their own force and charge through it. Regulus had. In the dark, the corner of his mouth lifted. This experience, once, is impossible to forget, and once will demand a second, then a third. He would have to improve it. The thing he'd just built was crude. The shell was essentially a shield charm molded into shape. It had a pointed nose and might vaguely be called streamlined, but there were too many aerodynamic problems to solve. The curvature of the wings, the fuselage cross-section, the nose angle, all affected drag. The propulsion was even rougher. Fiendfire burned in the exhaust port. It produced thrust, but the direction was unstable. He'd tacked on 2 auxiliary nozzles just to keep balance. What he really needed was a true thrust vectoring system, so the nozzles could swivel and steer the thrust, letting the craft go where he wanted instead of merely being pushed. Structural integrity was another issue. Approaching the speed of sound, the shield charm shell began to vibrate and ripple. Regulus recognized that as the structure hitting its limits. He'd have to reinforce it, layer it, make a multi-layered composite. If one layer of shield charm couldn't take it, then 2, 3 layers, weave magic into a denser fabric. His body's tolerance was a problem too. The cushioning charm offset some of the inertial pressure, but not enough. At speeds over 1,000 kilometers per hour, he felt his organs being compressed by G-forces. He needed better anti-G methods, perhaps wrapping his whole body in magic so inertia would be distributed evenly rather than concentrated. And steering. This run had been a straight dash. He hadn't dared turn. To fly properly, he'd have to bank, turn, and make emergency stops. That required a refined control system, integrating magical perception with fine nozzle adjustments so the craft became an extension of his body. Ideas kept coming. Try higher, rush into the stratosphere to see what color the sky became, go a little faster and break the sound barrier to feel that invisible wall shatter. If he needed data, physics and engineering beyond raw magic, the Muggle world had a wealth of it. Airplanes, rockets, fighter jets didn't rely on magic. They relied on knowledge of air, materials, and energy. Muggles had spent centuries pushing speed from tens of kilometers per hour to thousands and then into space. Their formulas and blueprints were all out there. He'd need someone to look them up, but the House of Black couldn't be involved. The family name attracted too much attention. Voldemort's faction, Dumbledore's, the Ministry. Whenever his family did anything, someone watched. Even if nothing was discovered, there was no point in taking that risk. Better to use Muggle-born or half-blood students who had relatives in the Muggle world. Finding an excuse for family to go to the library or to buy a few books would draw no suspicion. He had a few candidates in mind. Nothing urgent. Take it slow. For now, he kept thinking about the craft. Theoretically, how fast could it go? A strong enough shield charm and a well-designed structure could survive supersonic airflow. Fiendfire provided ample thrust. So long as his magic supply held, he could push speeds to thousands of kilometers per hour. For his body, he could develop an anti-G charm and add a body-strengthening charm to temporarily reinforce his flesh. Thousands of kilometers per hour, fighter jet speeds. If he pushed it to the extreme, perhaps tens of thousands, but new problems would arise. A heat barrier. Could the shield charm withstand frictional heat? A radio blackout. At ultra-high-speed plasma might envelop the craft and cut off perception. Spatial distortion. At sufficient speed, space itself could become unstable. Each problem was harder than the last, but not insoluble. The heat could be managed with a cooling charm or by making the fiendfire burn slower and at lower temperature as a protective sheath. The radio blackout could be circumvented by relying on direct mental perception rather than sight or magical senses. Spatial distortion was precisely the direction of his research. Perhaps it could be used to his advantage. What if he went even higher? Breaking out of the atmosphere and into low Earth orbit would require first cosmic velocity, about 28,000 kilometers per hour. At that speed, the atmosphere was a solid barrier. Breaking through generated extreme heat. But Muggles had heat shield materials and ablative layers. There was no reason magic couldn't provide equivalents. Once in space, there was no air, no drag, but also no lift. The craft would continue until reverse thrust slowed it. Regulus thought of those images and shook his head, too far ahead. For now, finish the basics. He thought of Lord Voldemort's unassisted flight, surely the best method in the wizarding world. Fast, agile, enduring, capable of hovering. Voldemort's comprehensive performance was unbeatable. He flew like a wisp of smoke, too fast to see clearly, turning and stopping so suddenly others couldn't follow. One word entered Regulus's mind: elegant. His own craft might surpass Voldemort in raw speed. Shield charm plus fiendfire could theoretically push beyond what Voldemort achieved, but turning and endurance would not match the Dark Lord's. Voldemort's body flew. He could change direction at will and fly indefinitely. Regulus's craft required control, adjustments, and trajectory calculations. Hovering could be attempted by vectoring thrust downward and reversing the fiendfire jet to offset gravity, but it would never feel as natural as a body in flight. Another thought followed: combat applications. Fiendfire was power, but also a dark arts curse. If one spilled it and let it run loose while flying at those speeds, could he cover all of Britain in an hour? Britain is about 1,000 kilometers north to south. At his current speed, he could cross it in less than an hour. If he trailed uncontrolled fiendfire behind him, he could set a third of Britain ablaze in an hour. Faster, more fiendfire, and all of Britain in 2 or 3 hours. Europe? Roughly 3,000 kilometers north-south and 5,000 east-west. At his speed, crossing it would take 3 to 5 hours. Unleashed fiendfire could spread across most of Europe in a day. He shook his head. Thoughts like that were idle. Countless practical problems remained: controlling fiendfire, sustaining magic, surviving the forces. And what was the point of mass destruction? Destruction was easy. What came after mattered more. He let the thought drop, lay back, and closed his eyes, ready to sleep. Then he realized someone was missing from the dormitory. Hermes hadn't returned tonight. Regulus's mouth twitched. Forget him. Sleep. The last image before he drifted off was fixed and sweet: Lord Voldemort flying ahead and him trailing behind, closing the distance until they flew side by side, turning his head to smile. Lord Voldemort, I want you to fly with me. That image sent him to sleep. At the edge of the Forbidden Forest, not far from where Regulus had landed, Dumbledore stood beneath an ancient oak, watching the lights of the castle in the distance. Moonlight from behind him silvered his long white beard. Professor McGonagall stood beside him, her expression grave. Albus, she said. Dumbledore turned. Horace, Filius, and Pomona were all going to come, McGonagall continued. I persuaded them to go back. Dumbledore's expression was gentle. Thank you for your trouble, Minerva. McGonagall looked toward the depths of the Forbidden Forest, where Regulus had already walked off. The residue of magic from moments ago still lingered on her senses. That was fiendfire, she said. Dumbledore nodded without speaking. He used fiendfire, McGonagall said. He's a second-year student, using fiendfire in the Forbidden Forest in the middle of the night. Albus, it's far too dangerous. Dumbledore regarded her, a faint smile at the corners of his mouth. Minerva, are you worried about him? McGonagall inhaled deeply. I'm worried that his talent is too great. The ability Mr. Black has shown in Transfiguration, he isn't even studying Transfiguration in the normal way. He's pondering the essence of it. Do you know what that means? I do, Dumbledore replied softly. McGonagall met his gaze. Fiendfire is dangerous. If you don't control it well, the whole Forbidden Forest could burn. And what does he use it for? Flying, shield charm shaping, and fiendfire propulsion. No ordinary wizard would think of that. Dumbledore's calm voice remained. Minerva, do you think it isn't normal? McGonagall frowned. Do you think it's normal? Dumbledore smiled. I think it's fascinating. He looked toward the forest, molding a shield charm into a specific shape, using fiendfire for propulsion, driving himself at that speed. Yes, not something a typical wizard would conceive. But this child was never a typical wizard to begin with. McGonagall fell silent for a moment. Albus, he used fiendfire. I know, Dumbledore said. McGonagall emphasized, fiendfire is dark arts. Yes, Dumbledore agreed. And are you worried? McGonagall pressed. Dumbledore turned to look at her. Minerva, you have taught him for a year. Do you think he is the sort of child who will be consumed by the dark arts? Heh, you're overthinking it, Dumbledore said lightly. McGonagall considered him for a moment. He had asked many transfiguration questions, she thought. Deep, probing questions, but not dark ones. Dumbledore nodded, then asked with interest, Have you seen his Patronus? McGonagall froze. I haven't. Dumbledore's voice held a trace of pride. I have. It's a starry sky kite, a Patronus that can traverse space. That's the innate ability of the creature, Dumbledore went on. Very rare. But the form is less important than what it signifies. That child has a light in his heart, a light that's bright enough. McGonagall looked at him, a question running through her mind. Patronus? In the Black family, there were few precedents. In all her years of teaching, she'd seen many Blacks, clever, proud, often exceptionally talented in transfiguration. But a Patronus was different. Few could produce one. Sirius might manage it. He was mischievous, inattentive at his studies, fond of pranks and bullying, but he was also a fundamentally happy boy, the kind of person whose memories would supply a Patronus when the time came. Regulus, did he have enough joy in him? McGonagall realized she couldn't answer. She'd been watching the boy only in terms of academics, his gift for transfiguration, his startlingly mature questions. As for his inner life, she knew little. She was the head of Gryffindor, after all. If Albus said this was so, she trusted him. But a starry sky kite? A magical creature Patronus? She looked at Dumbledore's back, puzzled. What exactly was hidden in that black-haired Slytherin's heart? Dumbledore took a step forward, white beard catching the moonlight. On the last full moon, he said, he came here, following his brother. We talked. McGonagall raised an eyebrow. About what? About many things. About transfiguration. About himself. About werewolves. McGonagall listened closely. That child has already found his own path. Every single thing he does is on that path. Whether it's fiendfire, transfiguration, or that curious way of flying earlier tonight, they were all his own choices. He turned to her. Minerva, do you think a child with a dark heart could have asked those questions? Could summon that kind of Patronus? Could he have found himself stranded in the Forbidden Forest and come up with that inventive method of flying? Dumbledore asked. McGonagall was silent a long while. Perhaps you're right, she said finally, but I'm still worried. Dumbledore laughed softly. Worrying is natural. You are his professor, not his enemy. She remained grave. Albus, you are always so optimistic. He shook his head. It isn't optimism, it's belief. He looked toward the distant castle. Believe in the child's heart. Believe in the path he's chosen. Believe that when he meets obstacles, he will find ways to solve them himself. Just now, he wanted to fly, so he built something that could fly. McGonagall followed his gaze. That contraption of his was indeed, she searched for the right word, creative. Dumbledore laughed. Gryffindor might have suited him better. McGonagall shot him a look. Albus, he is a Slytherin. I know. I mean only that spirit of daring to think and to act. It's rather Gryffindor. She didn't answer. In the distance, the door of the shrieking shack opened and a few figures stepped out. James and Sirius supporting Lupin, with Peter Pettigrew trailing behind. The four moved slowly. Lupin was nearly being dragged along. McGonagall's face tightened. Those boys. Dumbledore raised a hand. Minerva. She glared at him, displeased. Dumbledore smiled and said, It's been lively enough tonight. Let them go. McGonagall drew a long breath, watched the four figures slouching back toward the castle, and did not scold them. After a while, she said, I'm going in. Dumbledore nodded. She turned and took a few steps, then paused. Albus, do you really believe him? Dumbledore thought for a moment. Minerva, do you know what that child has been doing this past month? She shook her head. He's been trying to merge his will into the space of Hogwarts, Dumbledore said. He wants some sort of protective will to become part of the castle itself. McGonagall was startled. He has not succeeded, Dumbledore admitted, but he's tried, and he's tried many times. Do you understand what that means? Dumbledore asked. She said nothing. Manifesting one's will so profoundly as to affect the outside world is not something an ordinary wizard manages. Many wizards never even touch that door in their entire lives, yet he was knocking on it in his second year. McGonagall remained quiet. Dumbledore continued. Did you feel his fiend fire earlier? That level of control, the way it obeyed him, that's because it was willing to listen. His expression softened. That child's will is already strong. The attempt to graft a protective will into space and the taming of fiend fire both prove that. Such a will not be easily swayed by outside forces, will not be manipulated, will not lose its way. He has his own thoughts, his own choices, and his own path. Minerva, perhaps you can try to believe in him and give him some time. A protective will is a beautiful thing, isn't it? Dumbledore mused at last. McGonagall was quiet a long time before she finally nodded. I understand. She turned and walked toward the castle. Dumbledore watched her disappear into the moonlight, then looked instead toward the forbidden forest. Merging one's will into space, making protection an extension of oneself, flying with fiend fire, each was remarkable alone, and taken together, they reminded him of another person. That other person, too, could tame great flames. His will had been impossible to ignore, and he liked to do things by unconventional means. Regulus's fiend fire burned orange-red, but the way he tamed it with sheer will pointed in a similar direction. With a bit more, a touch more experience, a firmer sense of judgment, a firmer resolve, could it turn blue too? Dumbledore shook his head, a small smile tugging at his beard. I'm overthinking it. Regulus has never even met him. There's no way it could be the same. He turned and walked toward the castle, the moonlight casting a long shadow before him. Regulus opened his eyes, feeling refreshed. After the chaos of the previous night, he'd slept well. He sat up, stretched, and became aware of someone watching him from the side. He turned. Hermes sat in his chair, staring at him with a touch of resentment. His hair was tousled, his clothes crumpled, and sweat still clung to his skin. He looked like someone fished from a river and left on the bank to dry. Hermes was indeed resentful. Regulus had left early the night before. Before he'd gone, Hermes had asked if he'd be back. Regulus had said he would, perhaps later. Hermes had thought nothing of it, practiced until exhaustion as usual, and then lain down waiting to be picked up. He had waited all night. No one came. Because he'd trained so hard, he didn't recover his strength until nearly dawn and had to crawl back on his own. Regulus's face was untroubled. He almost felt amused. He pushed back the covers, rose, and went toward the bathroom. As he passed Hermes, he greeted him in the same even tone as always. Morning. Hermes' eyes widened. He stared at Regulus's retreating back, mouth opening and closing, words failing him. Morning? Just a casual morning? He rose and followed into the bathroom, standing in the doorway to watch Regulus wash. Regulus moved with calm, routine ease, no hint of guilt or apology. Hermes leaned against the frame in silence. He'd waited all night, simply so Regulus would see him first thing in the morning. He hadn't wanted anything else, only the sight of him. Instead, Regulus had a brief morning and then went about his day. Hermes had no right to demand more. Still, the thought of Regulus standing there, solemn, saying, Hermes, I'm sorry, flashed through his mind and made him shiver. The idea of such a sincere apology was terrifying. An apology meant for something truly serious. Better to forget it. This was fine. After Regulus finished and dried his face, he glanced at Hermes in the mirror. Aren't you going to wash up? Hermes inhaled, straightened, and stepped into the bathroom, stripping off his clothes as he went. When the afternoon bell rang after classes, Regulus headed for Professor Slughorn's office. It was Saturday, October 21st, the weekend. With his current skill, he could apparate to France in a few steps, but not within Hogwarts. Rules had to be followed. He would put in for leave, inform a professor, and leave a record. The office door stood half open. Regulus knocked and went in on the summons. Slughorn sat behind his desk with a glass of wine and several plates of sweets arrayed before him. His face brightened at Regulus's appearance. Regulus, sit, sit. Regulus took the offered seat. Slughorn pushed a plate forward. Try some, just arrived from Italy. Regulus sampled a piece. Delicious, very sweet. Slughorn beamed. So what can I do for you? Regulus set the sweet down. Professor, I'd like to take 2 days off this weekend. Slughorn arched an eyebrow. Leave? Where to? France. Some personal matters. Slughorn nodded without pressing. Will 2 days be enough? Yes. Slughorn picked up a quill and scrawled on a parchment. All right, approved. Saturday and Sunday, yes? Regulus nodded. Slughorn put the quill down and leaned back, his expression shifting just slightly. By the way, Regulus. Regulus looked up. The commotion last night was quite something. Slughorn took a sip of wine. Minerva, Phileas, and Pomona were all alerted. If Minerva hadn't held us back, we would all have gone into the forbidden forest to have a look. Regulus's mouth twitched. He understood the professor's hint. The staff knew what had happened. He'd suspected that Dumbledore would have been at the Shrieking Shack after things settled down. Hearing Slughorn say it so casually, as if it were a trifling disruption, told him that the Fiendfire, the midnight activity, and the excursion into the forest were considered closed matters. He made a mental note to be more discreet next time and to add another function to his contraption, remove any traces after use. Otherwise, the next time he flew, he'd have a crowd gaping at him again. Slughorn fixed him with a kindly glance. That thing of yours? You made it, didn't you? Regulus lowered his head and murmured a soft, embarrassed, Slughorn didn't press for details. He sipped his wine and said in a relaxed tone, Be careful next time. Don't cause such a stir. Regulus looked up, contrite. Professor, I'm sorry for disturbing your rest last night. Slughorn waved a hand. It's all right, really. Good for young people to have vitality, so long as you don't set the Forbidden Forest on fire. All right, off you go. Enjoy your weekend, and be back for classes on Monday. 226. Chapter 224. Dumbledore's Transfiguration Strategy. October 21st, early morning, Hogsmeade. Regulus walked along the stone path to the edge of the castle grounds and climbed a small rise. It was quiet, broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the sound of his own footsteps. A thick fog lay over everything, a great white ocean that seemed to swallow the world. Hogwarts' towers and turrets showed up only as blurred silhouettes, looming like phantoms in the mist. To the west, toward the Forbidden Forest, the haze thickened into churned clumps of whiteness that swallowed any detail. Regulus stood and watched the castle for a long time. The fog broke the familiar outlines and reassembled them. Watching it, he felt something like standing at the edge of the world, where one more step might take him into another place. He turned and knew it was time to go. His father's letter had given him an address. Wisteria Manor, in the Luberon Mountains of Provence, France. The map was crudely drawn, but those few lines were enough. Apparition could get him there, but not in a single hop. The straight-line distance from Hogwarts to Provence was nearly 1,000 kilometers. An ordinary wizard's apparition was reliable only over a few hundred kilometers. Beyond that, spatial positioning blurred, the space itself could become unstable, and careless wizards could get lost or suffer splinching. Formal international travel required notifying both countries' ministries of magic, applying for a portkey, and wading through heaps of paperwork. He didn't have the time, and he had no desire to submit to such scrutiny. More importantly, the British ministry was now heavily infiltrated by Lord Voldemort, basically a sieve. If he filed an application, someone would certainly report it to Voldemort, and one inspection would reveal why he was going to France. That would bring trouble on him, and worse, on Andromeda. She had finally escaped that circle and was living quietly. If she were dragged back into danger because of him, Regulus couldn't allow it. So formal channels were out. The Starry Sky kite would do perfectly. With a clear mental destination, it could take him where he needed to go. He drew a steady breath and was about to call his Patronus when something moved at the edge of his vision. He turned and saw a figure in the fog in moon-white robes with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles. Dumbledore stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the castle with a faint smile. The fog around him seemed to clear, creating an island of clarity. When he noticed Regulus, he raised a hand and waved. Regulus halted, a little speechless. He had assumed someone would be watching. He had taken leave properly. The head of house and the headmistress had signed off, and his recent exploits made him impossible to ignore. But he hadn't expected Dumbledore to be here, waiting in person. It didn't annoy him. He liked Dumbledore's company. The old man often offered insights from a higher perspective that were worth far more than a few lessons. The night they'd talked outside the shrieking shack, the last full moon had opened something up in him he'd barely understood until later. He simply felt with a rueful inward smile, "Of course, it's like this again." He apparated beside Dumbledore. The fog around him was violently pushed outward for a few seconds before closing in again. He looked up in his usual formal way. "Professor." "Good morning, Regulus," Dumbledore said, smiling. "Lovely weather today, isn't it?" Regulus glanced at the mist and had to agree. "It's quite something." Dumbledore followed his gaze to the fog, the corners of his eyes creasing. "Heading to France?" Regulus nodded. "To the Luberon, to see a relative." Dumbledore gave a pleasantly natural, "Oh." "Then, what a coincidence. I'm also bound for France to visit an old friend. It's on my way." "If you don't mind, we could go together." Regulus almost wanted to scoff. For a wizard of Dumbledore's mastery, especially one familiar with spatial travel, any destination was yet another brief step. "On my way" could mean anything. But he said nothing. Dumbledore's timing and curiosity had never been merely small talk. Regulus's mind flicked to a possibility. An old friend in France, if old meant centuries, then Nicholas Flamel came to mind. Regulus kept his face expressionless. "Professor, this old friend, could it be?" Dumbledore blinked once. "Perhaps it is who you're thinking of. Perhaps not." Regulus' mouth twitched. Classic Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at him keenly. "Well, shall we travel together?" There was no point in refusing, and the invitation piqued Regulus's curiosity. As he hesitated, another thought nudged him. A few days earlier, when he had asked for leave, Slughorn had said, "That commotion last night was rather loud. Minerva and the others all know." The professors must know he'd been playing with fiendfire in the Forbidden Forest. Regulus didn't think Dumbledore would judge him harshly for it. Fiendfire was dangerous, but Dumbledore had faced and contained far worse. Still, he was only in his second year, and being capable of that much fiendfire explained a lot. Since Dumbledore had already seen it, Regulus might as well show him something else, to balance any impression. "I can show you the way I travel," he said. "I can take you." Dumbledore looked surprised for a heartbeat, then intrigued, then slightly embarrassed. "Regulus," he said in the even tone he used for delicate matters, though his eyes lit up and his beard twitched, "that method of yours doesn't strike me as very friendly to the elderly." Regulus blinked, then realized Dumbledore meant the roaring fiendfire-powered craft he'd once improvised. He wanted to laugh. Dumbledore had been curious enough to want a ride. But it wasn't that. What Regulus really meant to offer was the starry sky kite, the Patronus-based method of traversing space, bright, pure, and utterly unaffected by dark flames. Before he could explain, Dumbledore leaned forward, enthusiasm bright in his voice. "Still, your idea is fascinating, using a shield charm to shape, fiendfire to drive, and combining that with Muggle methods of flight. But I've been thinking along different lines, from the perspective of transfiguration." Regulus stopped mid-sentence. "Transfiguration?" Dumbledore continued, hands moving as if sculpting ideas in the fog. "You know, the human body wasn't designed to fly. Our bones are too fragile, our muscle distribution unsuitable. The strain and blood flow at high speeds would make most people faint. But we can borrow." He pictured a dragon in the air. Borrow the structure of a dragon, the toughness of dragon bones. Dragons fly fast and endure brutal winds. Their skeleton is the key. If you could transfigure your bones to incorporate that toughness, no wind would blow you apart. Regulus' eyes brightened. "Thestrals," Dumbledore added. "You've ridden one. A Thestral's body has an innate spatial perception. If you could borrow that, your flying body wouldn't need to search for a route. Your body would know where to go." Regulus turned the ideas over in his head. He had been thinking in strictly physical engineering terms: thrust, aerodynamics, structure. Dumbledore was proposing a biological approach: adapt the body itself to the demands of flight. That was not defying physics so much as making the body obey it. "What about a phoenix?" Regulus asked. "For regeneration. Even if your skeleton could take it, internal organs would be badly damaged at those speeds." If you had a phoenix's recovery, you'd repair as you were injured and could keep flying, Dumbledore said approvingly. And a griffin, he added, for vision. When you were flying that night, things blurred into streaks. A griffin's sight would let you see clearly at speed. Regulus remembered the blur. He'd been relying on magical perception more than literal sight. What about a thunderbird, he asked. Dumbledore laughed. So direct of you. A thunderbird's feathers catch and ride the wind. Borrow that, and you wouldn't have to fight the air so hard. The images flashed through Regulus's mind. Dragon, thestral, phoenix, griffin, thunderbird, each a distinct trait. If he could borrow and fuse these traits into his body through transfiguration, could all those characteristics exist together, he asked. Theoretically, yes, Dumbledore said calmly. Composite transfiguration, human transfiguration that combines the traits of different animals. The difficulty lies in preventing conflict. The ferocity of a dragon, the solitude of a thestral, the transcendence of a phoenix, the pride of a griffin, the freedom of a thunderbird, each comes with instinct. If you borrow them, those instincts come with them. Suppress them with will? Regulus suggested. Dumbledore shook his head. Not suppress, fuse, make them a part of you, like how you tamed fiendfire, not by repression, but by making it willing to listen. Regulus fell silent, thinking through the implications. The two of them stood in the fog, sharing ideas and possibilities sentence by sentence. Dumbledore, as always, was a walking repository of knowledge, practically a portable library of 1,000 imaginings, and the conversation opened new directions in Regulus's mind. Dumbledore spoke of the principles of transfiguration, while Regulus added considerations from a physical, non-magical perspective. One approach came from the heights of magic, the other from Muggle physics. The two directions could, astonishingly, be brought together. The more Dumbledore spoke, the more animated he became. The more Regulus listened, the more absorbed he grew. Time slipped by unnoticed. At last, Dumbledore stopped and glanced up at the sky. Though there was nothing to see, the fog was too thick, a sheer whiteness overhead. He made a small sound of regret. Time is up. He looked at Regulus with a fond, appraising look. He had heard much in those words. Regulus was unlike any young wizard Dumbledore had met. The very talented were often proud. Pride itself was not the problem, but it closed people off. Those from old, secure families often carried stubborn certainties, beliefs taught from childhood that became their only view of the world. Anything outside the magical world was Muggle. Anything Muggle was vulgar, and anything vulgar was beneath their attention. But Regulus was different. He could use magic, and he could also step outside it. Those Muggle ways of thinking, those non-magical approaches, were not inferior in his hands, only different. If they were useful, he took them. If they worked, he kept them. How he had come to that mindset, Dumbledore could not say. It defied the House of Black's upbringing and the lessons of Hogwarts. That independence put Dumbledore at ease. A person not trapped by talent would not be trapped by magic itself. A person not bound by tradition would not be bound by anyone. He knew who he was, what he wanted, and how to get it. Such a person would not go astray. He was someone worth liking. Dumbledore had lived a long time and seen many people. Few could look up, and even fewer could look outward. Regulus not only looked up and out, he could make what he saw part of himself. Conversation with him was not exhausting, and gifts given to him would not be wasted. Watching him move forward, one wondered how far he might go. With gratification in his eyes, Dumbledore extended his arm. Well then, Regulus, it's time. We should be going. Regulus was still thinking, the discussion having opened a door in his head. Composite transfiguration, borrowing animal traits so the body itself could adapt to flight, was not a simple improvement, but thinking in another dimension. If it could be realized, his flying device would not be just a machine, it would be an extension of his body. He pushed the thought aside, came back to the moment, and mirrored Dumbledore, extending his arm. Dumbledore's expression softened into amusement. A deeper smile warmed his eyes. Regulus didn't speak. A silver-white light bloomed from his chest, surging outward until it focused and took form, the starry sky kite. Its silver wings unfurled, each feather edged with starlight. It perched on Regulus's shoulder, cocked its head at Dumbledore, and let out a clear, bright cry, cheerful, affectionate, curious, an elegant greeting. Dumbledore's eyes widened. Something flickered there as he watched the bird. The kite hovered above Regulus's head, then circled once over Dumbledore. Starlight drifted down and settled on the old man's moon-white robes like a thin veil of light. Dumbledore watched the falling light and understood what Regulus had meant. A patronus of that strength and refinement, its application as a pure, transporting light, spoke louder than any suspicion about darkness. No matter how deeply a wizard knew the dark arts, something that pure could not be faked. Dumbledore's gaze on Regulus grew gentler. This child must have had a remarkable holiday for his patronus to shine like that, he thought, smiling inwardly. He deliberately hushed his magic. Any interference might have spoiled the patronus's transit. Regulus sensed it and returned a look of quiet pride. The kite finished its circle, dove, and struck him. The silver light flared, engulfing Regulus, then contracted and vanished with him. Dumbledore stood a moment longer, his robes still dusted with starlight. He touched a speck of it. It winked at his fingertip and then disappeared. He smiled, and then he too was gone. The weather in Provence was impossibly fine. The sky seemed washed clean, an intense, translucent blue that invited you to look up. Thin, lazy clouds drifted east. Sunlight poured down, gilding the valley in warm gold. The lavender had been harvested, so the endless purple was gone. But between the furrows and in the crannies of the rocks, gray-green leaves lingered, and a faint scent still rode the breeze. The Luberon ridges glowed ochre-red in the sun, their soft, rolling lines folding into the sky like the strata of the earth. An eagle would sweep past now and then, wings outstretched, drawing a dark silhouette against the blue. At the foot of one ridge stood a stone house, its walls smothered in wisteria. No blooms now, only vines and leaves glinting in different greens. When the wind came, they whispered. A low mossed wall enclosed a small courtyard. A few twisted olive trees cast sparse shadows. Time itself seemed to slow here. Silver-white light appeared and then faded. Regulus and Dumbledore stood in an open yard at the mountain's base. Dumbledore took a deep breath and smiled. "A wonderful feeling," he said, then looked at Regulus. "The starry sky kite, how marvelous." Regulus nodded, then asked, "Professor, what does it feel like to travel with a phoenix?" Dumbledore blinked. "You want to know?" Regulus nodded. Of course he did. A phoenix. Dumbledore laughed softly. "Then you must ask Fawkes yourself. He likes you very much. He must miss his little companion." Regulus paused. He remembered Dumbledore's words in the headmaster's office last term. Phoenixes see souls. They are close to pure, warm hearts. A stir moved in him. If a phoenix could read souls, what had it seen in him? What, compared to before, would be different now? He resolved to befriend Fawkes properly when he returned. Dumbledore watched him with a smile. Together they looked toward the stone house where people bustled. Figures moved in and out, ferrying things. White veils were tied to the courtyard wall, fluttering. Someone arranged heaps of white and pink flowers. Wedding preparations were underway. Dumbledore's gaze softened. He knew why Regulus had come to France. Andromeda Black's wedding. Of the three sisters of that generation, Bellatrix would marry Lestrange, Narcissa would marry Malfoy. Both unions were solid matches in the pure-blood world and exactly the choices the family expected. Only Andromeda had chosen differently, a muggle-born wizard. In the eyes of the House of Black, that was betrayal, defilement, unforgivable. By tradition, she should have been disowned, burned from the family tapestry, erased from memory as if she had never been. Yet Regulus had come. The boy stood in the sunlight, his profile quiet as he watched the preparations. His face showed nothing, but his eyes were intent. He had come to attend his cousin's wedding, even if the family would not acknowledge her, even if his presence might be noticed and condemned. He had come. Dumbledore watched him and felt something rush through him. Pride, being moved, and something else, an almost tender approval. Regulus knew the old man was watching, but that did not stop his own thoughts. Everything he had shown Dumbledore today had been deliberate. The advanced use of the Patronus proved there was light in him. That, whatever suspicions Dumbledore might have held, should have been enough to dispel them. Coming to Andromeda's wedding, showing he cared for family, was also meaningful in the old man's eyes. But Regulus understood there was an information gap. Dumbledore did not know the true shape of his life in the House of Black. The old man might imagine Regulus risking family wrath to do what he thought right. In truth, Regulus had not risked anything. Orion had given him Andromeda's address and told him of the wedding. It was not a rebuke, but permission. His father had laid out the facts and let him choose. To Dumbledore, it might look like a brave act. To Regulus, it was simply convenient. He smiled faintly. That was fine. The effect was the same. He knew what Dumbledore liked to see: light, love, choice. The headmaster chose to look at the good in people, even knowing that people were complex. Regulus sometimes wondered if Dumbledore failed to see human complexity. People could be entirely dark, yet perform good deeds for self-interest or reputation. People could be gentle, yet commit harm under pressure or fear. Most of us live somewhere in the middle, mixing light and shadow, sometimes better, sometimes worse. Dumbledore had surely seen this, yet he kept valuing light, love, and the choice toward goodness. Perhaps that was his way of finding hope. Regulus thought that was not naive so much as generous. He knew the truth of himself as well as anyone. He had killed. He was proficient with fiendfire, and curses like the disintegration curse, designed purely to kill, might already lie beyond even what was normally labeled the dark arts. And yet his Patronus was real. His care for family was real. There was light in him. Therefore, he could be a good person. He set those thoughts aside. Over at the house, someone was fastening a large white bouquet to the gate. Others adjusted the veils. Sunlight stretched the workers' long shadows across the yard. Regulus watched, no longer mulling over the rest. Zhuangzi Chisu sincerely presents Regulus of Hogwarts, Lord of the Starry Sky, exclusively premiered on Kella Novels. Chapter 226, Love is Not an Excuse. At noon, the sun was just right and the wedding preparations were finished. White gauze curtains in the yard fluttered in the breeze, and fresh flowers tied to the stone walls shone in the sunlight. A few muggles made final adjustments, straightening chairs and arranging bouquets. Regulus stood under an olive tree a short distance away and flicked his wand, casting a confundus charm on himself. The effect was simple. Except for Andromeda and Ted, no one who looked his way would take any notice. They would see a person standing there, but they wouldn't recall his face or feel any curiosity. His presence would be unremarkable. He took 2 steps forward, and with a subtle flick of magic, his wizarding robes flowed like water, shifting color and cut until they settled into a well-tailored dark gray suit. At 12, he was already half a head taller than his peers. Long years of magical conditioning had left him tall and straight-backed, and the suit accentuated the clean lines of his shoulders. White shirt, dark tie, polished leather shoes, he cut a striking figure. Sunlight filtered through the olive leaves, casting patches of light across his face. In just 2 short months, his features had matured. A higher brow, a more defined jawline. He looked toward the wedding scene with an unexpected warmth in his eyes. Dumbledore was still nearby. Regulus turned to ask, "Professor, will you come with me?" Dumbledore smiled and shook his head. "I won't. My sudden appearance at a private occasion would invite questions." He looked at Regulus. "Give my blessing to the newlyweds. Tell them an old friend wishes them a lifetime of happiness." "All right," Regulus said. "You look very well today," Dumbledore added. Regulus simply nodded. He looked good almost every day. Dumbledore smiled and vanished. Regulus had been waiting for that moment. His spatial perception had been active the whole time, but had picked up nothing. He shrugged. It was like the last time outside the shrieking shack when he hadn't noticed when Dumbledore appeared. He told himself that sooner or later he'd be able to catch the old man. Then he turned and went toward the house. People moved about in the yard, but no one noticed him. The confundus charm did its work. He wove through the crowd, taking in the decorations. It was a small wedding, 30 or 40 guests. Chairs were neatly arranged with a white cloth aisle down the middle. At the end stood a simple arch of white flowers and greenery, clean and unpretentious in the sunlight, Muggle style. Ted Tonks's parents were there, an elderly Muggle couple in rented formal wear. The old lady fussed with her dress, while the old man spoke politely with restrained excitement. A few of Ted's Muggle friends laughed loudly nearby. A handful of young wizards were blended into the crowd. Regulus could sense faint magical traces on them. They tried to act like ordinary people, but the habitual reach for their wands betrayed them. A group of girls by the house chatted and arranged flowers and gauze. Friends Andromeda had likely met in France. A pureblood defector marrying a muggle-born wouldn't be accepted by the mainstream. They'd chosen a foreign place and invited only those they trusted. Regulus climbed the side stairs to the second floor. The door to the room being used as a bride's lounge was slightly ajar. He stood in the corridor and peered through the gap. Andromeda stood with her back to the door, adjusting her veil in front of a mirror. She wore a white wedding dress with a long train spilling onto the floor. Her hair was swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. A soft, radiant smile lit her face. Two girls fussed with her train and spoke to her. She listened, nodding, smiling all the more. Regulus didn't go in. He leaned against the wall and waited. After a while, the other two girls left, chatting and laughing as they went downstairs. Andromeda followed, paused at the doorway, and froze when she saw him. Confusion flitted across her face, then disbelief, and then a rush of other feelings: surprise, a touch of being moved, an expression too complex for words. Her voice trembled slightly. "Regulus?" He smiled faintly. She hurried to him and examined him with shining eyes. She sniffed. "You've grown taller." She reached up almost impulsively to measure. "The last time I saw you, you were only shoulder height. Now you're nearly taller than me." Regulus said nothing, just looked at her. 2 years had changed her a little too. She had the long black hair, the gray eyes, the strong features of the House of Black, but her bearing was different from Bellatrix's fanatic edge or Narcissa's cool reserve. Andromeda had a gentle warmth about her. Standing in her wedding dress, the light in her eyes was brighter than any jewel. "You came," she said, voice soft. "You said if you needed help, I could find you," Regulus replied. "I came to see if you needed any help." She seemed stunned, then laughed. "You're still like this." She reached out as if to smooth his hair, then stopped, afraid of messing it up. "I thought," she began, and left the sentence unfinished. He knew what she had meant. She had thought no one from the House of Black would come. Her face held no resentment, no bitterness, only a calm acceptance. She had stopped expecting anything from that family, and perhaps thought it was better that way. The look faded. "How did you get here? Apparition?" "Something like that." "Did you get leave from school?" "Approved." "Does the school know you're in France?" "They do." Sunlight slanted through the window and warmed them. Regulus offered his arm quietly. "I'll escort you out." She stared at the arm, then laughed, radiant. She took it. "All right." They went downstairs together. The guests noticed them but didn't care. The confundus charm was effective. Andromeda walked slowly, holding his arm, the sunlight about them. Neither spoke as they crossed the yard. Ted Tonks stood by the sound system with a couple friends, testing the microphone. He was in a dark blue suit and bow tie, his light brown hair neatly combed, tall and solid. When he saw Andromeda coming toward him, holding someone's arm, he blinked, caught off guard. Andromeda stopped and introduced him with a bright smile. "Ted, this is my cousin, Regulus Black." A flash of complexity crossed Ted's face. He knew the House of Black and the pureblood fanatics who sneered at Muggle-borns. His first reaction to a black cousin was naturally guarded. But then he saw the way Andromeda held Regulus's arm and the look of family on her face. His expression softened and he extended his hand, sincere. "Welcome, Mr. Black. Thank you for coming." The formality didn't suit Regulus. He offered his hand with a small smile. "Just call me Regulus." "Regulus," Ted repeated, falling back to the informal. Ted glanced at Andromeda, then at Regulus, as if wanting to say something he couldn't. Regulus understood the sentiment. He wanted to thank Andromeda for what she'd given up: name, family, the past, and to promise he'd care for her. It wasn't the time for such declarations. Regulus let Andromeda go and stood aside, watching the pair. He could sense Andromeda's magic, gentle, stable, not strong. Yet as a member of the Black Line, her core was stronger than Ted's. Ted's magic existed, of course, but it was ordinary, on par with the other adult wizards present. Regulus's mind drifted to the timeline he'd read about in another life, how Andromeda would be happy until Ted died, how their daughter would later marry a werewolf and meet a tragic end. He pushed the thoughts away. Not here, not now. And as for that werewolf son-in-law, Lupin and Sirius could be friends or brothers all they liked, but marrying into that family and the complications that would bring, love cannot be an excuse. Regulus met Ted's eyes. Ted. Ted straightened. Just call me Ted. Regulus nodded. I haven't seen Andromeda in 2 years. I came to make sure she's all right. Ted listened, lowering his head. Regulus continued quietly. She chose you. That's her decision. I'm here to see her off. He looked Ted straight in the eye. The days ahead are yours to live, but one thing. Ted lifted his head, his expression set. Regulus's voice was flat and even. If anything ever makes her unhappy, no matter where, no matter how long, I will know. Andromeda laughed from the side. Regulus, are you threatening him? He glanced at her with a helpless expression. How was he supposed to follow that? She laughed again, delighted, and took Ted's arm, beaming. Don't worry, he wouldn't dare hurt me. Ted managed a wry smile. How could I? He turned serious and looked at Regulus. Regulus, I know what she gave up for me. I may never repay it all in this lifetime, but I can promise. He looked at Andromeda. To love her and be good to her always. Regulus regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. Relief washed over Ted's face. Andromeda watched them both, feeling a swell of happiness. Today, she thought, truly felt like a good day. Guests arrived one after another, about 30 in total, and slowly took their seats. Ted's parents sat in the front row. His mother kept smoothing her dress while his father held her hand and told her not to be nervous. A few of Ted's muggle friends clustered at the back, whispering and laughing, while a handful of young wizards lingered in a corner. Regulus watched their faces. They smiled and offered blessings. They clapped, but beneath it all, there was a faint, solemn sorrow. Coming here had been a choice. They all knew what the House of Black meant, knew what Andromeda had given up, and knew how many uncertainties lay behind this happiness. Still, they came and smiled. A gramophone began to play a soothing tune. Regulus felt he should recognize it, but he couldn't quite place it. Everyone stood and turned toward the house. Andromeda appeared at the top of the stairs on the second floor. Sunlight streamed through the window behind her, making the white wedding gown glow. She wore a lace veil and held a bouquet of white flowers, and she looked down at the people gathered below. Ted's parents looked nervous and expectant. His friends waved and smiled. The young wizard's eyes were red. Familiar faces watched her. Her gaze swept the room and landed on Regulus, the place where her father should have been. Instead of the man whose hand she might once have taken, there stood a 12-year-old cousin. Andromeda smiled and began to descend. Regulus met her at the foot of the stairs and offered his arm. Her hand trembled as she took it. She gripped him as if afraid he might disappear. Regulus felt the little earnest pressure and said nothing, simply led her forward. The dozen steps felt interminable. No one spoke. All eyes were on them. From the corner of his eye, he saw Ted's parents wiping away tears, the young wizard's worried expressions, and the sincere smiles of the muggles. No one seemed to find anything odd about the boy escorting the bride. No one asked who he was. They watched and accepted the procession. At the end of the red carpet, Ted waited, tears shining in his eyes. Regulus placed Andromeda's hand into his. He looked at Ted and said in a clear, low voice, "Andromeda, I leave her to you." Ted nodded fiercely. "Thank you." Andromeda looked between them. Her eyes were rimmed in red. The person officiating was one of Ted's relatives, a portly, middle-aged man in a white suit holding a book. He cleared his throat and spoke the usual Muggle wedding words, to stay together in richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. Regulus stood to the side and listened with no expression. Then it was time for vows. Ted looked at Andromeda and took a steadying breath. "Andromeda, I don't care what others say. The person I know is the person I want to marry. Whatever comes, we will face it together." Andromeda's eyes shone. "Ted, I left my family, I left my name, I left everything from my past, but I did not leave you. No matter what happens, I will be here." They took each other's hands. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Regulus watched from the side and found himself thinking, was it worth giving up family and a name? He looked at Andromeda's face, an honest, unhidden joy, and at Ted's steady, resolute gaze. Whether it was worth it was not for him to decide. Another thought came to him. Andromeda and Sirius were similar in some ways. Both had rebelled against the House of Black and chosen lives apart from the family. But their rebellions were different. Sirius's had been loud and dramatic, a slammed door and proclamation. Andromeda had left quietly, without argument or spectacle, disappearing like a drop into the sea. One was noisy, the other silent, but both chose what their hearts wanted, and both let go of what should not be kept. Perhaps the true face of the House of Black was not the portraits on the walls, nor the names on the family tree, but these people who dared to leave, who never looked back. The ceremony moved on to the exchange of rings. Ted produced a pair of simple silver bands and slipped one on Andromeda's finger with a shaking hand. Andromeda placed the other on his. Her motions were steady, her smile warm. The guests applauded. Following custom, friends and relatives stepped forward to offer blessings. One by one they spoke and stepped back. When Regulus's turn came, he rose and crossed to the couple. Ted's parents, the Muggle friends, the young wizards, all watched. No one knew who he was, but everyone waited. Regulus looked at Andromeda, then at Ted. The House of Black has a motto, toujours pur. Andromeda's expression flickered. The young wizards were taken aback for a second, then recovered, listening as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Regulus continued, "But I didn't come here today to say that." He met Andromeda's eyes. "Nothing is absolutely right, and nothing absolutely wrong. You must decide for yourself." Andromeda sniffed, tears brimming. Regulus turned to Ted. "Cousin, I won't judge the path you've chosen, but the person you chose," he looked at Ted, "seems all right to me." Ted grinned like a child. Andromeda began to cry openly. Regulus took a small box from his pocket and handed it to her. She opened it to find a key, the same key he had given her last Christmas, a key to a vault in the Paris branch of Gringotts. Andromeda was stunned. "Regulus, I didn't have much else to give," he said lightly. "When a couple starts life together, it's good to have a little extra money on hand." A hint of a smile touched his eyes. "Last time it was for emergencies. This time, it's so you know someone remembers you." Andromeda gripped the key, lips pressed together. Ted, unfamiliar with vaults at Gringotts, only saw the significance in her reaction. He looked from her to Regulus and said nothing. The young wizards who had noticed looked away as if nothing happened. The effect of the Confundus charm had been excellent. They saw, but did not dwell on it. Andromeda's voice trembled. "Regulus, if you do this, the family will know." "No one will know," he said. She stared, but he offered no further explanation. Orion might know, but his father would not care enough to stop him. The money was not a waste. The ceremony concluded. There was no religious rite or marriage contract, just two people making promises before their friends and family. Ted bent and kissed Andromeda. The guests cheered. Someone whistled. Regulus stepped back and watched. The gramophone shifted to a cheerful tune. They cut a 3-layer cake iced in white, topped with two little figures, one in a dress and one in a suit. Ted and Andromeda cut it together to another round of applause. Then the music changed to the wedding march. Ted took Andromeda's hand, and they began the first dance. Sunlight poured over them as her skirts spun and her leather shoes clicked on the stone. The crowd formed a ring, clapping and smiling. Some hummed the melody. Regulus remained apart from the circle, watching. Midway through the dance, Andromeda was swept away by a group of chattering Muggle friends. Ted stood for a moment, wiped his brow, then approached Regulus and handed him a fizzy orange drink. Regulus accepted it without drinking. Ted hesitated beside him. "Thank you for coming," Ted said. Regulus said nothing, just watched the guests. His face was cool now. The smile he had worn earlier was gone, replaced by a composed reserve. There was an indefinable presence about him, despite his small frame. Ted seemed to feel it and paused. "I know what Andromeda gave up for me. I probably can't repay it in this life," he said, "but I promise I'll treat her right." Regulus turned to him, expressionless. "You've already said that. Besides, that's your business. You don't need to tell me." Ted blinked, then laughed. "Understood." He reached out as if to pat Regulus on the shoulder, but meeting Regulus's steady gaze, his hand fell back. He smiled and went to rejoin the crowd. As evening approached and the wedding wound down, Andromeda found Regulus standing by the courtyard gate, staring toward the distant Luberon Mountains. She joined him. They were silent for a while. Finally, she asked, "When are you leaving?" Regulus glanced at the sky. "Before dark. And after you go back. The family," she began. "Don't worry," he said simply. She looked at him, eyes bright and fearful. "Regulus, take care of yourself out there." He gave a small smile. "You too." She reached up and ruffled his hair. He let her, unresisting. "You've grown," she said, "faster than I thought." "The world makes you grow," he replied, "whether you want to or not." She smiled, and then her tears fell again. Regulus took a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it. She wiped her cheeks and looked at the cloth. "When did you learn to carry a handkerchief?" He smiled. It was transfigured from a leaf. The setting sun had turned the valley golden. "I should go," he said. Andromeda nodded. Regulus thought for a moment, then said only one thing, "Be well." Then he vanished. Andromeda stood where she was, staring in that direction for a long time. Chapter 228, Super Old Man Paris, the 10th arrondissement. On an unremarkable street stood an unremarkable house. The stone had been blackened to a gray-brown by time. The windows were narrow, and rust crept along the wrought iron railings. Pushing open the wooden door revealed a long, narrow hallway and a staircase that creaked underfoot. Dumbledore climbed the steps. After 2 turns, he stopped in front of a dark wooden door. He knocked 3 times, a pause, then 2 more, and the door opened from within. The man who answered wasn't tall. His hair was snow-white, and he wore deep blue robes over a dark vest embroidered with golden symbols. His eyes were pale gray and kind, a gentle smile softening his features. Nicholas Flamel. His voice was quiet but clear. "Albus, Nicholas." Dumbledore returned the smile. Nicholas stepped aside. "Come in." The room was warm, a fire dancing in the hearth. The walls were crowded with strange apparatuses, brass dials, glass retorts, silver gears, and several metal spheres whose purposes were unclear. They moved on their own. Some spun, some ticked, some hovered and vibrated. A wide desk near the window was piled with parchment and open books. On the sill, a silver mechanical bird tilted its head and tapped its wings, making a faint metallic clink. Nicholas walked with short steps to the sofa by the fire and sat. Dumbledore took the one opposite. With a lazy motion, Nicholas sent a teapot to pour 2 steaming cups of clear, faintly scented tea. "Try it," he said. "It's a new blend." Dumbledore sipped. "Not bad. Pity there's no honey." They were quiet a moment, then Nicholas said, "It's been a long time, Albus." Dumbledore nodded. "Yes, a long time." He exhaled. "Nicholas, you know about Tom." Nicholas's expression didn't change. "I've heard. Things have been unsettled." Dumbledore took another sip. "More unsettled by the day." Nicholas watched him for a long beat, then asked, "Then why have you come today? Is there something in particular?" "There is," Dumbledore said, "but it isn't about Tom." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Then who?" Dumbledore's mouth curved. "A child." "A child?" Nicholas looked surprised. "A child worth such a trip?" "Worth it," Dumbledore said. Nicholas leaned back, curiosity piqued. "Talented?" Dumbledore considered. "Talented, and more than that." "Tell me." Dumbledore named him. "Regulus Black, the heir of his generation of the House of Black." Nicholas nodded. "The House of Black, old Arcturus back then." He let the thought trail off. "This child's magical aptitude is extremely high," Dumbledore went on. "He invented a spell in his first year, something to do with space. Minerva says in Transfiguration he's already pondering first principles. His Patronus is unusual. It can carry people through space. He's been practicing fiendfire to the point of nearly taming it." Nicholas listened, nodding occasionally. "Second year?" Dumbledore nodded. "Second year." Silence fell for a moment. Nicholas finally asked, "How does he compare to Riddle?" Dumbledore didn't hesitate. "Equal in raw talent." "But," Nicholas pressed, a smile softened the corners of Dumbledore's eyes, "but their aims differ. Tom pursues power to escape death, to prove himself above all and make others bow. This child pursues power too, but the Sorting Hat told me it saw a starry sky in his mind." Nicholas's eyes widened. "I thought it might be a metaphor. Ambition, breadth of vision, some lofty pursuit." Dumbledore watched the flames as if they offered an answer. "Now I think it may not be a metaphor. What he wants might simply be to step outside this world." Nicholas sat stunned for a few moments, then murmured, repeating the phrase as if tasting it. "Step outside this world. He certainly has a large appetite." Dumbledore nodded without comment. Nicholas fixed him with a different look. "Albus, your most recent regret is Riddle." Dumbledore was silent. Nicholas continued, "It's been decades, and you've never stopped thinking about it." Dumbledore laughed. "Nicholas, to you decades is recent." Nicholas smiled, sipping his tea. Then more directly, "The Philosopher's Stone?" Dumbledore said nothing. Nicholas waved a hand. Albus, how long have we known each other? You think I wouldn't know what you're thinking? Dumbledore chuckled. Nicholas, you're overthinking. I merely brought him to see the world. Nicholas grinned. When you lie, your beard twitches. Dumbledore stroked his beard. It didn't twitch. Nicholas rolled his eyes. Boy, where is the child now? He should be arriving soon, Dumbledore said, glancing toward the window. Outside, Regulus stood at the gate of Wisteria Manor, saying goodbye to Andromeda. A motion caught his eye, a leather glove waving in front of the gate, fingers curling and uncurling as if beckoning. He smiled. It was familiar, a bit of spectacle. He stepped forward and picked up the glove. It squirmed in his hand, then fell still. He tucked it into his suit pocket and finished his farewells. A second later, a force seized him by the navel and yanked him forward. The world blurred, and then he was in a narrow hallway. Wooden stairs, creaking treads, and at the end a dark door standing open. Dumbledore's voice called from inside, "Come in, Regulus." Regulus waved a hand, and the suit he wore shifted back into robes. He straightened his collar and pushed the door open. The room was larger than he'd expected. Fireplace, sofas, a desk, and walls crowded with moving, humming contraptions. Dumbledore sat on the sofa by the fire, and beside him, the white-haired man turned to regard Regulus with quiet curiosity. The name popped into Regulus's mind. Nicholas Flamel, alchemist, maker of the Philosopher's Stone, friend to Dumbledore for many years. He bowed politely. "Mr. Flamel." Nicholas smiled. "Sit, child." Regulus took the seat beside Dumbledore. Instinctively, his magical perception unfurled, only to find nothing. Nicholas's smile deepened. "The little fellow is probing me." Dumbledore's tone was gentle. "Regulus, there's no need for that." Regulus bowed his head in apology. "Sorry, force of habit." "It's impressive," Nicholas said. "Good to see." Regulus drew his perception back in. This was the first time someone had called him on it. He'd never been detected before. But then Nicholas Flamel had lived 600 years. He'd seen every trick. Regulus knew now that his gift, while subtle and usually hard to detect, could fail against certain eyes. Dumbledore had noticed it too. Magic perception was only a tool. As his star orbit meditation improved, his perception tended to merge with his sight. Perhaps he'd have been unseen if he'd only used his eyes, but there was no need to test it. Being caught here wasn't insulted. They had simply laughed it off. Still, the thought lingered. Not every powerful wizard would be so benign. Some might trace the probe back to him. He let the thought go and took in the room more carefully. There were at least 7 or 8 objects that were clearly no ordinary curiosities. On the mantel, a brass sphere engraved with dense symbols spun on its own. On the desk sat a silver hourglass whose sand flowed upward. A glass cabinet held crystals of many colors, some glowing, some exhaling a cold mist. Nearby stood a complex metal device of interlocking gears and levers, ticking faintly as it worked itself. A small side table bore a book bound in an unrecognizable material with a faint golden sheen. Its pages flipped by themselves, paused on a page, and then flipped back. Regulus let his gaze travel back to the 2 men on the sofa. An old man, and a very old man. He didn't ask why Dumbledore had brought him. He simply waited. Still, he guessed the reasons, perhaps to broaden his perspective. Alchemy was different from transfiguration and charms, another way of thinking. Perhaps it was a test, to see how he would react to talk of the Philosopher's Stone and the temptation of immortality. Or perhaps Dumbledore had thought, since they were in France, it would be convenient to show him something of the world. More likely, Regulus thought, it was a test. After all, there had been precedent. Chapter 229, The Living Billboard of the Magic World. Regulus was indeed curious about alchemy. But the truth was, if you wanted to learn about alchemy, you had to look to France, to Beauxbaton, to Nicolas Flamel. In the British wizarding world, routes to true alchemical understanding were painfully few. Hogwarts offered the subject, but only as an elective in the 7th year. By the time a student chose it, graduation was almost upon them. What could anyone learn in a single year? So the understanding of alchemy among most British wizards was embarrassingly shallow. They assumed alchemy was simply a craft for making magical items, carving runes on a cauldron so it stirs itself, casting a charm on gloves to make them fire and waterproof, creating portkeys to whisk people away. But that was item making. It wasn't alchemy. Regulus parsed the difference in his mind. Crafting magical items was about adding functions to objects, carving a piece of wood so it can fly, enchanting a robe so one can breathe underwater, binding a mirror to show an enemy. The object remained essentially the same, it merely gained new uses. Even wands, brooms, and invisibility cloaks belonged to that category. Alchemy, however, altered the essence of matter itself. Lead becoming gold meant it was gold from the inside out. Molecular structures changed, atomic arrangements shifted. What you held was, in essence, a different thing. Crafting dealt with processing. Alchemy dealt with transformation. Magical items wear out or fail, but the products of true alchemy were permanent. The Philosopher's Stone was the quintessential example. It could endlessly produce the elixir of life and convert base metals into gold without losing its power after a single use. No wonder the British wizarding world had no great alchemists, Regulus thought. No education, no tradition, no accumulation. How could there be results when wizards' understanding of alchemy remained at the level of gadgetry? Alchemy was a profound branch of magic, a cross-disciplinary field touching ancient runes, potions, transfiguration, and runes. Its threshold was extremely high, very few could truly master it. Even at Beauxbatons, few graduates could make anything approaching real alchemical work. And then there was Nicholas Flamel. Regulus looked at the white-haired man opposite him. Born in the 1330s, a figure spanning the late Middle Ages into the early Renaissance, Flamel occupied a special place in the history of magic. Turning stones into gold, the elixir of life, either achievement would secure a place in history. He had achieved both. By virtue of a single philosopher's stone, he claimed the crown of alchemy and became the greatest alchemist in the record, without equal. As he thought this, another idea struck him, about himself, about the disintegration curse. The disintegration curse aimed to return order to chaos, to shatter the whole so that existence itself fell apart. In his terms, it increased entropy, raising disorder and collapsing structure. Alchemy was the opposite. Turning lead into gold was taking a common metal and creating a more ordered structure. The elixir of life held an aging body in a stable state. Alchemical feats could make stones move, imbue dead objects with vitality, let items remember their former owners and answer when called. These were all about condensing chaos into order, decreasing entropy. If the disintegration curse represented destruction, alchemy represented creation, entropy increase and entropy decrease, destruction and creation, two directions of the same coin. But there was a problem. The world naturally moves toward disorder. Entropy increases on its own. To make things orderly, to turn chaos into order, was to fight the world. From that view, alchemy was more extraordinary than the disintegration curse. Regulus admitted it. No matter how conceptually exalted his curse was, it ultimately followed the world's flow, whereas Nicholas Flamel had spent a lifetime opposing it. Still, in the realm of magic, were creation and destruction truly opposites? Regulus thought of the stars. They burn and fuse, turning hydrogen into helium, helium into carbon, creation of heavier elements. Then they die and explode, scattering their creations back into chaos. Those remnants condense into new stars and planets. Creation and destruction formed a cycle rather than a simple opposition. He watched these thoughts drift by, not noticing how much time had passed. Nicholas glanced at the wall clock and then stood up, slightly unsteady. Regulus, Albus, I'll go see if there's anything to eat. Dumbledore smiled and nodded. Good. Regulus rose to help. Dumbledore neither stopped him nor offered aid. He simply sat with an amused look. As Regulus stood, Nicholas already reached to stop him. The old man waved a hand and smiled. No, I'm happy to prepare the food. You sit and chat with Albus. Regulus hesitated, looked at Dumbledore, who still wore that expression as if the whole scene amused him. Regulus settled back and said politely, Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Flamel. Not at all, Nicholas replied. Only when young wizards visit does this place feel alive. He gave Dumbledore a half-teasing look. Otherwise, it's just two old men here. Very dull. Dumbledore laughed, his beard twitching. He made no protest. Nicholas shuffled out with small, brisk steps, short stride but quick, his arms swinging slightly like a waddling penguin. His back was bent, but there was an indefinable lightness to him. Regulus watched him go. That gait, those little steps, the slightly swinging arms, there was a keen sense of déjà vu. He sat back down and looked in the direction Nicholas had disappeared. After a few moments, he turned to Dumbledore. Professor? Dumbledore was still gazing where his old friend had gone, and only slowly turned his head. Regulus asked directly, "Why did you bring me here?" Dumbledore smiled. "Simply to broaden your horizons. Magic." Regulus leaned back on the sofa and watched the fireplace flames as if they were very far away. "Sometimes I feel like I've only just scratched the surface. What Hogwarts teaches is sufficient, but it's strictly enough, only enough." His voice was tinged with feeling. "It's like standing on the shore, scooping up a handful of seawater, taking a sip, and then claiming you know what the sea tastes like." He looked at Regulus. "You have ideas, an inkling of how magic works. Alchemy would complement that well. Contact with it might give you inspiration." Regulus considered this. Whatever Dumbledore's motive, testing his views on death or simply expanding his knowledge, he didn't care. Opportunities like this were rare. This was Nicholas Flamel, a man who had lived for centuries and stood at the pinnacle of alchemy. Even his mere existence was a trademark of the wizarding world. He had lived from the 1300s to now, seen the Black Death sweep Europe, watched muggles go from horses to flying machines. He had watched generation after generation of so-called gifted wizards rise, make names for themselves, grow old, and die. Regulus couldn't imagine the level of magic he had mastered, his depth of understanding, or his explorations into matter. Being here, with a chance to learn from him, was something Regulus intended to make the most of. He had many questions, especially about nourishing and strengthening the soul. This might be the place to find answers. Just then Nicholas's voice came from the other room. "Albus, Regulus, come eat." They followed the sound. The dining room was modest, a long table, a few chairs, dishes arranged in a French style, ratatouille, grilled fish with olive oil, a basket of baguettes. The food looked and smelled excellent. Regulus sat and said, "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Flamel." Nicholas waved it off with a smile. Dumbledore had already picked up a fork with practiced ease, cut a piece of fish, tasted it, and nodded. He broke open a piece of bread, dipped it in oil, and ate as if he were in his own kitchen, relaxed and content. Regulus found the sight oddly reassuring. Despite his age, Dumbledore looked completely at ease here. A question struck him. Dumbledore was surely one of the few wizards who maintained a friendship with Nicholas Flamel. To reach that level, one's magic had to be strong, one's thinking deep, one's talent great. Nicholas generally had no time for ordinary people. What had Nicholas felt watching Dumbledore age, from youth to middle age to old age? Perhaps Dumbledore never noticed. When they first met, Nicholas was already old. But Nicholas had watched countless friends grow old and die, like autumn leaves drifting away. What sustained him? The Philosopher's Stone gave him longevity, but longevity alone couldn't explain his life after achieving such heights. He had already turned stones to gold and made the elixir of life. What else could he have been pursuing? Regulus remembered that in fewer than 20 years, Nicholas would choose to destroy his stone and forgo extended life. So perhaps even now, the idea was already present in his mind. He pushed those thoughts aside and enjoyed the meal. Indeed, it was delicious. The baguette wasn't as hard as he'd feared. The crust was crisp, the inside soft and chewy, easily torn with his teeth. After the meal, the three returned to the fireplace. Dumbledore leaned back on the sofa, looked at Regulus, and blinked. "Regulus, ask anything you like. Guests are rare here with Nicholas. Don't waste the chance." Nicholas regarded him kindly, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "Ask away, child." Regulus thanked them again, then spoke plainly. "Mr. Flamel, about the Philosopher's Stone." Dumbledore's beard twitched. A flash of surprise passed through his eyes, brief but unmistakable. Regulus felt a small satisfaction. He had expected Dumbledore might be surprised. Based on his understanding of Regulus, he'd thought the boy might shy away from the topic. But Regulus asked directly. He continued, "The Philosopher's Stone can turn base metals into gold. Lead becomes gold and the mass changes. Where does the extra mass come from?" Nicholas's eyes lit with interest. "Alchemy does not see matter as fixed," he said. "Matter is alive and can be changed." "Lead and gold," he went on, "are different states of the same thing. Lead wants to become gold, but lacks something." "What does it lack?" Regulus asked. "Magic," Nicholas said. "Magic can turn into matter, and matter can turn into magic. That is the foundation of alchemy," he explained. "You ask where the mass comes from. It comes from magic. You pour magic into the substance and it becomes mass. Regulus ran the idea through his mind. Magic turning into mass, wasn't that? He didn't say it aloud, but followed up. Is there a limit to this conversion? In theory, no, Nicholas replied. In practice, yes. The total amount of magic you can mobilize, the strength of your mind, your depth of understanding of matter, those are the limits. Regulus pondered that, then asked another question. What about the soul? Is the soul matter? Chapter 230. I Know Alchemy? Dumbledore leaned back on the sofa and listened to the conversation between the two of them. Regulus's first question, about the conversion between 2-3 and matter, sounded basic at first. It was the sort of thing found in Hogwarts textbooks, mentioned in 6th year Advanced Transfiguration or in 7th year Potions Theory. Magic could act as a medium to change matter, and matter absorbed 23 during the conversion. That was the basic principle of alchemy. Dumbledore didn't see why Regulus had asked it. The boy's understanding of alchemy might indeed be limited. He was only 12 after all. And yet Dumbledore felt something was off. Regulus wasn't the sort to ask casually. There was always something behind his questions. Magic and matter could be converted into one another. What did that imply when combined with this child's grasp of space magic or natural magic? The possibilities made Dumbledore's mind race. Young minds were restless. The second question caught his attention. Soul? Dumbledore's eyebrows twitched. He looked at Regulus, then at Nicholas Flamel, shifted slightly, propped his right arm on the sofa, rested his chin on his hand, and listened more intently. Nicholas fell silent for a moment after hearing the question. Firelight from the hearth flickered across his face, his pale gray eyes fixed on Regulus with an expression hard to name. He repeated, "Is the soul a form of matter?" His voice was thoughtful. Alchemy has debated that for 600 years without a definitive answer, but I can tell you how I see it. Regulus listened closely. Nicholas continued, "From the perspective of alchemy, I treat it as matter." He made a gesture, as if trying to grasp something in the air. It doesn't take up space and you can't touch it, but only by treating it as matter can I do anything with it. The essence of alchemy is to do things to matter, to change it, transform it, reshape it. If I don't treat the soul as matter, I have no way to begin. He smiled. When you used magic perception on me just now, I felt you looking. Do you know how I knew? Regulus thought, then guessed. Because there were fluctuations in your magic perception? Nicholas shook his head. Regulus tried again. Because you are too powerful, or your perception is more sensitive than mine? Again, Nicholas shook his head. Regulus hesitated. Is it an intuition formed over hundreds of years? All wrong, Nicholas said, smiling as he waved a hand. Regulus stopped guessing, but a word floated into his mind. Observation. Maybe it wasn't that Regulus's magic perception had been detected. The act of observing itself had been perceived by the observed, like when he looked at the four, and the little figure looked back at him. He held his silence and waited for Nicholas to explain. Nicholas's smile deepened. It's simpler than that. You were looking at me, and I knew it. He leaned in, lowering his voice slightly so Dumbledore wouldn't catch the tone. But I feel your looking isn't just magic perception, is it? You can already see more than most. Regulus's heart stirred. Just that one use of magic perception, and Flamel noticed. Of course, a 21 who had lived 600 years would become extraordinarily sensitive to being observed. Flamel's words confirmed Regulus's guess. Observation is an interaction. Looking at the little figure every day reinforced its existence. Each gaze was part of a growing connection between him and that soul. That was what Flamel meant by, you were looking at me, and I knew it. Regulus let that sink in. Nicholas looked between him and Dumbledore. Dumbledore's posture remained relaxed, his expression unchanged, but a flash of realization crossed his eyes. He didn't interrupt. Nicholas resumed, you can already see it. That's the first step. Seeing means it exists. Regulus straightened. Mr. Flamel is right. Nicholas smiled and glanced triumphantly at Dumbledore. Regulus noticed the tiny exchange and found it quietly amusing. The two old men's rapport was interesting to watch. But being able to see it doesn't mean you can keep it, Nicholas said, his tone turning serious. The soul is light and diffuse. It scatters easily. You have to find in 20 to fix it. He gestured again. In alchemy, To refine anything, you first need a nucleus for the crystals to grow around. The soul is the same. Without a core, it is mist that scatters. With a core, it can solidify and develop. He looked at Regulus. What is your 22? Regulus thought. I don't know. It could be something you persist in, someone you can't let go of, or the thoughts that turn in your head every night. But it definitely exists, otherwise you would have scattered long ago. Regulus pondered. What was his? 22. His persistence had always been the same, wanting to step out, to see what lay beyond the stars, to know what else existed beyond this world. That longing had been with him since he was very young, large and encompassing. The nightly reflections in the room of requirement, the spells he worked out, the star orbit meditations, his ideas about the Pursum 4, those were all anchors. Someone he couldn't let go of? He was 12. That didn't figure yet. They all could be. Flamel was right. Regulus asked, Mr. Flamel, can the soul grow stronger? A flash of satisfaction warmed Nicholas's eyes. Of course. Like alchemy, matter consumes 3 to transform, so what does the soul eat? It feeds on your experiences, on the choices you make, and on the things you refuse to let go of. He continued, Albus said you have a Patronus. Have you ever wondered why yours is so bright? Regulus cocked his head, a little puzzled. Because I'm good, he offered. Because you have light in your heart. That light is what the soul feeds on. It consumes the things that make you shine. Regulus considered the analogy. If the brightness of a Patronus reflected how well a soul was being fed, then happy memories, touching moments, and what one is willing to protect were all nourishment. But another question came to him. Was that the only kind of nourishment? If negative, destructive things could also feed the soul, anger, killing intent, commands to destroy, what would that mean? Would one be devoured by darkness, or would one take it in and make it part of oneself? Patronus fed on light, perhaps dark arts fed on darkness. If both kinds of experience nourished the soul, what would it become? Creation and destruction could be cyclical, so were light and darkness truly opposites? He did not reach an answer, but he knew it was worth thinking about. Nicholas did not press him. Dumbledore remained quiet, watching Regulus with something like wonder. This child could already see the soul and was thinking about how to make it grow. That was not a talent merely born of skill. It required deep self-awareness and inner exploration. Most, as 21s, never even opened that door in their lives. Regulus had done it in his second year. Dumbledore's mind drifted to their conversation outside the shrieking shack on that full moon in September. Seeing Regulus so pensive now, he knew the boy had taken those words to heart and was moving forward. He looked at Regulus with admiration. Nicholas watched with the same expression. After a long moment, Regulus came back to himself. He saw the 2 old men watching and gave a small bow. Sorry, I was distracted. Nicholas waved a hand. It's all right. Did you figure anything out? Regulus thought, then said, I understand some of it. Other parts I'm still working through. Nicholas nodded, pleased. Good. Things understood all at once are often wrong. He grinned. So remember these 3 things: seeing, anchoring, feeding. If you can see it, that means it exists. If you can anchor it, you have a 22. If you can feed it, you know what to give it. None can be missing. He held up 3 fingers. Seeing, anchoring, feeding, you're already doing all 3. You just didn't realize this is alchemy. Regulus repeated the 3 words in his mind. The clearer the sight, the steadier the anchor. The steadier the anchor, the more it can feed. The more it feeds, the clearer the sight. An escalating cycle. One could not be merely passive. One had to make active choices, choose experiences that strengthened the tour, actively feed the soul. It didn't conflict with the goal of lighting up 19. Influencing the outside world was itself part of the experience. The deeper the experience, the more the soul fed. The more it fed, the firmer the anchor. The firmer the anchor, the greater the chance of awakening. 19. They complemented each other. Nicholas looked at him and said, After 600 years, I've learned one thing. Some questions don't need an answer before you act. Act first, and the answer will come with the doing. Regulus answered with quiet gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Flamel. Nicholas waved his hand. No need for thanks. Your questions were good, so my answers were interesting. He glanced at Dumbledore. Much better than those random questions of yours. Dumbledore chuckled and offered no argument. After Nicholas Flamel finished speaking, the room fell into a hush. The logs in the fireplace popped and hissed. Sparks leapt up and then died. The alchemical instruments on the side table continued their slow, mechanical ticking as if nothing had happened. Regulus Black turned Flamel's words over in his head, but other thoughts crowded in at the same time. Flamel had said his Patronus was so bright because there was light in his heart. That was true, but not the whole truth. The brightness of Regulus's own Patronus, the starry sky kite, the stars always turning inside his inner world, came from more than just light in the heart. It had roots in something deeper. He remembered the first time he had summoned the starry sky kite on a cliff in Ireland. He had never probed that moment further. To him, the Patronus wasn't only about shining or dispelling darkness. Its greatest gift had been to change how he understood magic. Up until then, magic had been formula and logic, something to dissect and reassemble. The Patronus showed him that magic could be alive, could be feeling, could be something beyond neat equations. Rationality was the skeleton, sensibility the flesh. That balance, the Patronus had given him that. But to say the starry sky kite was nothing but light felt incomplete. Standing on that cliff watching the sunset, the magic in his veins humming along with his emotions, he'd felt something ready to burst out of him. And then the Patronus had appeared. Was he happy then? Certainly. The Patronus charm is the purest condensation of positive emotion. The starry sky kite could push back darkness, dissolve despair. Its existence negated constraints. It was full of light and warmth, but that was a means, not the whole. There were other parts of him, when the urge to kill rose, when he imagined how to make an enemy vanish cleanly and without trace. Those were also him. The starry sky kite signified freedom, exploration, longing for the wide world. Light and warmth fueled that longing. They weren't the destination. Dumbledore cherished the Patronus because he believed that such a light in the heart could keep darkness from overturning the world. Regulus understood that, but he couldn't wholly agree. The Patronus was a part of a person, not their entirety. He certainly wouldn't say that aloud. He couldn't very well stand up and protest. No, I have a Patronus, but I'm not bright. So he let it be. If everyone expected him to be the bright one, he'd play the part. There was another, more consequential detail in Flamel's explanation. Magical energy could be converted into mass. If that was true, then there should be a wizarding analog to equals mc squared. The figure for c squared would be enormous. A palm-sized mass, fully converted into energy, could level a city. Flamel had lived 600 years. Had he been converting magical energy into mass to sustain his life? Using magic to replenish the body's lost mass? If so, how much magical energy did he consume every day? It was speculation, no proof. Yet even the confirmation that magic and mass could trade places was enough to set Regulus's mind racing. He put this together with his own guesses about how magic conducted through the humping willow. The implications were intoxicating. While he was thinking, Flamel waved a hand, and the cups on the table slid through the air of their own accord. A silver teapot floated to Dumbledore, filling a cup with amber tea. A crystal glass rose to Flamel, who poured himself deep red wine. A smaller pot drifted to Regulus, pouring hot chocolate that steamed in the chill air. Dumbledore sipped and closed his eyes in pleasure. Flamel took a taste, then looked at Regulus with something like approval. Watching a second-year wizard ask probing questions, consider answers, and fall silent in thought was a rare joy to a man who'd seen so much. Regulus drank the chocolate. It was the right temperature, sweet without being cloying, with an indefinable aroma. He set the cup down and addressed Flamel directly. "Thank you, Mr. Flamel. I've learned a lot today." "No need to thank me," Flamel waved him off. "I said what I could. Whether it helps depends on your ability to understand. If you couldn't follow, my words would be useless." He chuckled and then asked, "Child, how long do you think is enough to live?" Regulus blinked. The question shifted the conversation, and his mind was still tangled in thoughts about magical energy, patrons, and the growth of the soul. He hadn't expected this, but it was an appropriate prompt to reveal his attitude. He considered seriously and replied honestly, "I haven't thought about it. I'm only 12. Dumbledore smiled. "Nicholas Flamel, that's a little early to be asking." Flamel shook his head. "Not too early. When I was 12, I was already wondering whether I could live longer than everyone else. Regulus raised an eyebrow. Mr. Flamel, do you still think about that now? Flamel fell quiet. Firelight danced across his face. His pale eyes seemed to look somewhere beyond the room. Dumbledore watched him too. After a long pause, Flamel smiled. I do, but what I think now is different. When I was young, I wanted immortality because I feared death, because if I died, it would all be gone. He went on, now I want it because I want to see what happens next. Regulus answered, a little embarrassed. I haven't decided how long to live. I just think, as long as no one kills me, that's fine. Both old men laughed, Flamel until his eyes creased, Dumbledore until his beard trembled. Regulus waited and then added, if one day I can no longer move and it's time to die, then I'll die. It's no great matter. Flamel's eyes brightened with curiosity. You're so practical? Regulus shrugged. Not exactly practical. I just think life is for doing things, not for the sake of living itself. Then, with a younger man's rueful grin, he added, of course, that's what I think now. Who knows what I'll think later? After all, I'm only 12. The two elders laughed again. When Dumbledore's amusement faded, he said to Regulus with obvious pleasure, Regulus, I'm very glad you think that way. Life is for living. Experience what should be experienced. Feel what should be felt. Death is another sort of adventure, but it's not something to worry over now. Regulus nodded, but his mind had drifted inward. Living to do things. That was right. But what if one day everything that could be done had been done? What then, if one really had to go into that vague place between life and death, to keep walking inward? He thought of the theories about the soul. What if, instead of breaking a soul apart and hiding pieces like Lord Voldemort, one could preserve it intact? What if one could nurture a soul, grow it until it could leave the body and still interact with the world? What if one could cultivate within that glowing little being a few powerful stores of magical energy, let them grow with the soul, perhaps so the soul itself became capable of casting spells? If that were possible, what would the inward journey be like? Complete extinction, or something else? He didn't know, but he felt a reluctance to simply surrender to whatever lay past death. If it were unavoidable, one should at least prepare, so that, if it were possible, one might return. Regulus realized he had been silent. Flamel's voice pulled him back. Then what are you living for? The list in Regulus's head was endless. Developing magic, researching space, lighting up the stars, growing the soul. Then he paused. He'd been watching Flamel while answering. Something had shifted in the old man. On the surface, Flamel smiled and spoke as before, but Regulus sensed a subtle change, like someone walking and then stopping, no longer certain of going on. He remembered Flamel saying he wanted immortality now to see what would come next, but the warmth was gone from the words. They sounded performed, as if for an audience. There was a depression beneath them, the sense that everything worth seeing might already have been seen. A thought flared in Regulus's head. Maybe Flamel already intended to destroy the Philosopher's Stone within 20 years and give up on living longer. He glanced at Dumbledore. The headmaster had been watching him quietly. When their eyes met, Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but Regulus saw something like recognition in it. The look seemed to say, "You noticed?" That understanding made Regulus aware that this visit had a purpose beyond answering questions or testing him. Dumbledore had brought him not just to let Regulus learn, but to let Flamel see something he had not yet seen. Regulus hesitated, considering how much to say. The Sorting Hat had already seen parts of his mind. Dumbledore must know. There was nothing to hide. Regulus drew a breath. I want to see what's out there. Out there? Flamel asked. Outside Hogwarts? Regulus pointed up. Those stars are very far away. Light takes thousands, tens of thousands of years to reach us. Some of the stars we see are already dead. I want to know what's really there. Are there planets around those stars like ours? If there are, do they have life? If there is life, do they have magic? What is their magic like? Flamel was quiet for a long time. He glanced at Dumbledore, who said nothing, sitting with that easy smile, his eyes saying, I told you so. Flamel turned back to Regulus, and for a moment the centuries of stories he'd heard, of wizards chasing power, authority, immortality, must have weighed on him. Albus had called this child someone who wanted to walk out of this world. Hearing the boy speak it himself altered it again. Regulus added, "Maybe I won't get to go in my lifetime, but if I don't think about it, I'll never go." After a pause, Flemel let out a small, rueful laugh. "I always thought I had seen everything that should be seen." Nicholas rose, his movements still a little unsteady. "It's getting late," he said, looking at Regulus with a gentle expression. "The boy should be going back." Regulus was momentarily taken aback. He had assumed he would stay the night. He still had so many questions about the details of 41 conversion, the intersection of alchemy and transfiguration, the limits of biological 23, and whether a soul could truly be refined. But now that Nicholas had spoken, there was nothing to be done. He could not very well overstay his welcome. Besides, after this meeting, Nicholas's impression of him should be favorable. There would be more opportunities. Nicholas's voice grew even gentler. "Next time you come, don't wait for Albus to bring you. Come by yourself." He went to the wide desk, picked up a palm-sized metal sphere from a pile of instruments. It was silver gray, its surface etched with dense runes that seemed to dance in the firelight. He handed it to Regulus. "Take this. When you want to visit in the future, just give it a twist." Regulus accepted it with both hands. The metal ball was slightly warm, as if it held its own internal temperature. He realized at a glance that it wasn't a portkey so much as a beacon or invitation. He bowed. "I will, Mr. Flamel." Nicholas waved him on. "All right, off you go. Albus, take him away." Dumbledore rose with a smile. "Very well." They left together. As they reached the door, Regulus glanced back. Nicholas stood by the hearth, his shadow long on the wall. The alchemical instruments continued their slow, independent motions, their ticks sounding like a quiet farewell. The door closed behind them. Outside, night had already fallen. Paris glowed with warm amber light spilling from windows onto cobbles. A carriage passed in the distance, the clip-clop of hooves sharp in the dim street. Now and then, a motor car rumbled past and vanished around a corner. The air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from some unseen stall. Regulus and Dumbledore walked side by side in silence. His thoughts circled back to Nicholas. A 38 over 600 years old. How much had he seen? How many people had he met? How much 41 had he mastered? It seemed unlikely that a few words from a 12-year-old could shift so vast an existence. Someone like Nicholas Flamel had long since entwined his thoughts and will with 41 itself. Without Dumbledore's introduction, Regulus would have been just another curious child. Those remarks about the stars, those flights of fancy, to most they would sound like a child's babbling. Could such words really make an alchemist of 6 centuries reconsider the desire to die? It was hard to believe. Regulus found himself thinking that Dumbledore often used young boys to nudge old men. In the original timeline, he had used Harry with Slughorn to pry out information about Horcruxes. Now he had used Regulus with Nicholas, hoping to rekindle a spark of life in an old friend. He glanced at Dumbledore. The old man walked with his hands clasped behind his back, moon-white robes conspicuous in the night though invisible to the muggles around them. Whether the spark had been lit, Regulus could not tell. He had simply played his part. They walked under the recurring sweep of street lamps. Their shadows lengthened and shortened as the lights passed. Regulus finally broke the silence. "Professor, you didn't bring me here today just to broaden my horizons, did you?" Dumbledore looked down at him, amusement in his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "It's just a feeling," Regulus said. Mr. Flamel seemed a bit despondent. They walked on for a while without answer. Then Dumbledore spoke, a hint of sentiment in his voice. "Nicholas is my friend, a friend for many years." Regulus listened. "He has lived too long, so long he feels he has seen and experienced everything. That kind of thought is more terrible than any curse." Dumbledore paused. "I never persuade people to live. Death is merely the next great adventure." He turned his head toward Regulus and smiled. "But if he still wishes to live, I would be very glad." Regulus nodded. Death could indeed be an adventure. Dumbledore continued, "What you said today about the stars, about wanting to see what lies up there, those were lovely thoughts." Regulus shrugged. "I suppose after looking at them so much, I can't help but wonder." Dumbledore patted his shoulder and said no more. Regulus kept thinking, though. Speaking of the heavens served another purpose. A grand, distant ideal could blur the sharp edges of factional conflict. Saying his eyes were on the heights rather than the ground signaled that he was not yet aligned. His earlier comment about only wanting to avoid being killed was also a statement of position. Killed by whom and why? In the present conflict, it would be Voldemort's side or Dumbledore's. Dumbledore surely understood all this, but he simply smiled and asked nothing. Regulus knew the old man's style. Give time and guidance, never force, at least not now. The moment of a final choice had not yet come. He had to admit that his performance had been convincing. If he ever had to choose a side, Dumbledore could protect the House of Black. He could find a small house, hide its location within his own soul with a Fidelius charm. Voldemort would never find a single Black. But at what cost? To surrender Grimmauld Place, the family businesses, centuries of accumulated standing, all for the sake of survival. And the House of Black was not yet truly his. He was only a 12-year-old heir, not the head. The industries, connections, political influence, and the 38s who relied on the house were not his to give away on a whim. Nor could he simply walk away from Voldemort's faction whenever he pleased. Dumbledore understood that even more clearly, which was why he did not press him. Silence on these matters was a kind of mutual understanding. Regulus accepted that it was for the best. They paused at a street corner. Dumbledore looked toward the distant lights, then reached out. "The Patronus's movement is excellent," he observed, "but it's late. We'll return straight to Hogwarts." He gave Regulus a wink. "Once you're back, try letting it traverse the castle. It should work." Something quickened inside Regulus. Was this permission, or did Dumbledore already know it could? He did not overthink it. He would find out at school. He took Dumbledore's arm. In the next instant, the Parisian streets vanished, and the familiar height and chill of the astronomy tower replaced them. Regulus steadied himself and breathed deep. There was no particular sensation, only a calm certainty of being home. Within the walls of Hogwarts, and with Dumbledore by his side, the outside turmoil felt muffled and distant. The school was quiet. Fears of the war, the shadow of Voldemort, and debates about loyalties were muted here. The small restlessness within the walls was only background noise. This was the perfect place for him to strengthen himself. He needed it. Dumbledore did not hurry away. They stood together, looking up at the clear night. Stars crowded the sky, Cygnus spanning the Milky Way, Aquila to the south with Altair facing Vega across the Celestial River, Lyra near the zenith, and Draco winding through the northern sky, the head of the dragon forming an arc. Dumbledore watched for a while, then said, "I used to look up at the stars often. They are beautiful and vast." He lowered his gaze to Regulus and smiled. "But I never thought of going up there." Regulus answered simply, "The stars are beautiful. Sometimes just looking at them is enough." Dumbledore smiled and fell silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "You asked earlier whether 41 and Mass can be converted into one another. Why did you ask that?" Regulus's heart skipped. Why had he asked? Because another thought had occurred to him. If 41 could be turned into Mass, then Mass could be turned into 41. If enough Mass could be converted into 41 in an instant, the Mass would effectively vanish, becoming pure one. And if that 41 were released all at once, what sort of spell would that be? He could not imagine it clearly, but he knew it would be terrifying. He chose a lighter tone. "I just want to make 41 feel more like real magic." Dumbledore was taken aback for a heartbeat, then laughed softly. "An interesting answer." Regulus looked down and said nothing more, though inwardly he thought, "Once I do it, you can tell me whether it was interesting or not." Dumbledore looked away, then said, "Good night, Regulus." A moment later, he was gone. Regulus stayed a little longer, looking at the stars, then went down the tower. He reached the dormitory around 10. Avery and Alex were at the table, playing Exploding Snap. Hermes was not there, likely still in the room of requirement, pushing himself at that hour. When Avery saw him, he shot upright. "Regulus, where were you all day? I haven't seen you since breakfast." Regulus glanced at him. Slytherin watched, and people were always looking. Even with roommates he trusted, there was no need to volunteer everything. "The library," he said. Avery blinked. "The library? I was there today." Regulus cut him off. "What did you two do today?" Avery stammered, flustered. His gaze slid away. Alex averted his eyes, pretending to study his cards. Regulus ignored them, gathered his toiletries, and went to the washroom. He had been busy all day. He was not exactly exhausted, but he did not feel like doing anything else tonight. After washing, he returned and lay down. The exploding snap grew quieter. Avery and Alex exchanged a look but did not press him. He closed his eyes and continued thinking through the day. There were two main gains. The first was confirmation that 41 and mass could be converted, a concept too vast to tackle right away. How to do it? In what manner? How much 41 would be required? How could it be controlled? Who would one use it on? Theoretically, if the mass of a body could be wholly converted into 41, such power could upend even Hogwarts. But how to achieve that? The disintegration curse breaks things down but does not make mass disappear. To make mass vanish required a deeper principle, perhaps the pinnacle of transfiguration, perhaps a different application of alchemy, or perhaps a synthesis of both. He did not know yet. He would take his time. The second insight concerned the soul. Seeing, anchoring, and feeding were actually a single process. A soul did not grow locked away. It must go out, experience, and interact. The things it experienced, the choices it made, the effects it had on the world, these were what nourished it. This was the same direction for Kindling 25. The path forward would likely be to get out and do things. After turning the ideas over in his head for a long time, he drew the curtains, sank his consciousness inward, and let the sleep come. The 35 moved in their places. 6 stars stood where they belonged. The small soul figure waited where the lights converged, glowing steadily. It was no brighter than the day before. He let himself fall into sleep. Chapter 233, The Crimes of Black. On the last Wednesday of October, the weather in the Scottish Highlands was its usual gloom, low clouds and a thin curtain of mist. In the History of Magic classroom, Regulus sat beside a fogged window. The world outside was indistinct. Professor Binns droned on about the giant wars, and several students were nodding off, but Regulus's mind had wandered far beyond the castle walls. He knew, with a clarity that made his chest ache, that the only way to elevate the Black name was to exert influence beyond Hogwarts. But under Dumbledore's watchful eye, the influence he could wield directly at school was limited. The other students were the most immediate target, not an ideal solution, but the most feasible one. As a Slytherin, especially in this era, he was separated from the other houses by a thick barrier. His sway rarely extended beyond Slytherin circles. What did leak out was reputation, and most of it was bad. The things he had done in his first year, regardless of his intentions or how they were seen inside the house, looked ruthless and bullying to students of other houses. To them, he was a cold, entitled pureblood, a likely future follower of Voldemort. Even if he managed to win enough influence among his peers, it would be hard to spread that influence beyond Hogwarts. Hogwarts was a school. They were only students. The kind of external clout he wanted couldn't be achieved by schoolyard politics alone. But then, a different thought crossed his mind. If making a stir inside Hogwarts wouldn't do, he could make a stir against Hogwarts. If such a vision ever came to pass, if he actually blew up Hogwarts, would that be enough? It would certainly make Regulus Black a name everyone in the wizarding world would know. The Blacks would become an unavoidable node in the annals of wizarding history. He smirked at the future headline he could imagine: The Destruction of Hogwarts, The Crime of Black. The imagined account read itself in his head. In month X, 197X, Hogwarts student Regulus Black, while attempting to test an alchemical theory, caused the entire castle to be reduced to ashes through improper operation. Fortunately, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore intervened in time, saving a handful of students. Witnesses reported that at the moment of the explosion, Black stood at the center of the ruins, wand in hand, bewildered. Asked why, he replied only, "I just wanted to try it." Reconstruction took 7 years and countless galleons, all paid by the House of Black. Some called it the most expensive experiment in living memory. Others said it was the first public revelation of the power of theoretical magic. In any case, Regulus Black's name would be forever etched into the history books. He twitched the corner of his mouth. Setting aside whether such a thing was even possible, Hogwarts meant more to the British wizarding world than centuries of history or a list of notable alumni. It nearly stood for British wizardry itself. Destroying it would bring the wrath of both Dumbledore and Voldemort. Voldemort, who regarded Hogwarts as his first true home and the only place he acknowledged. Regulus pushed the thought aside. Hogwarts would remain intact. He should not and could not destroy it, but destroying something else with consequence, that remained an option. That afternoon, in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom on the third floor, Regulus pushed the door open. Several students were already inside. Slytherins sat to the left and Gryffindors to the right, the aisle between them a clear, unspoken boundary. Professor Vance stood behind the podium, in his 40s, lean and precise, hair neat and eyes sharp. The students were restless with excitement. After nearly 2 months of theory and basics, today's lesson would be practical combat. "Quiet," Vance said, and the room fell silent. He waved his hand, and desks and chairs slid themselves to the sides, leaving an open space. "Pair up, 2 per group. Use the spells you've learned." His gaze lingered on a few faces. "Begin." The room erupted. Students found partners, some by invitation, some by selection. The divide between houses held. Nobody crossed the aisle. Regulus sat still. Hermes sat still. Around them, the consensus was simple. No one wanted to spar with Regulus. Hermes, too, everyone knew his level, was no one's preferred partner. Lena and Samuel stood in their corner, exchanging a resigned look. They and each other were a fixed pair in any class. Regulus glanced toward Avery. Avery. Avery looked up. Regulus nodded toward Samuel. "You pair with Vance." Avery blinked, looked at Samuel, then at Regulus. He understood. Last time, Vance and Costa had run errands for Regulus to help him find something. This was repayment. By the virtue of his surname, Casbert, Avery's acceptance would smooth things for the half-bloods in Slytherin, giving them protection. Avery had always looked down on half-bloods. In his mind, they were dirty. But after the speech in the common room, standing before the house as Regulus had, Avery had felt how it was to command attention. He remembered how his father at the ministry would deal with people he disliked when necessary. Adults measured the utility of actions, not feelings. Thinking that through, he walked over and adopted a composed posture. "Vance, you're with me." Samuel stared for a breath, excitement flashing across his face before he tamped it down and offered a tight nod. "Okay, Mr. Casbert." Avery waved and took his place in the center. Alex approached Lena. "Lena, we'll pair up." Lena, surprised, smiled. "Okay, Alex." Regulus watched all of it without comment. Behind public faces and private thoughts, how many masks did everyone wear? Only he and Hermes remained. They rose at the same time, stepped to one side of the cleared floor, and faced each other. Professor Vance's eyes lingered on Regulus for a beat before he turned away. Rumors had followed the black boy since term started, that he had bested older students in his first year, that his status within Slytherin was unusual, that he thought differently from others. But in class, Regulus's work was simply excellent, homework immaculate, spell work precise, knowledge thorough. Nothing brazen, nothing showy. Vance had heard the gossip but dismissed it. Hearsay thickened the truth. Today's exercise would show exactly what level Regulus was at. "Begin." Spells erupted across the room. Students lunged, dodged, and grimaced where they were struck. Avery took the initiative against Samuel, forcing him mostly onto the defensive. Alex coached Lena through timing and cover. She learned quickly, using a chair as improvised shelter. Regulus and Hermes stood motionless opposite each other and raised their wands. Hermes struck first. "Stupefy!" A red jet of light shot from his wand toward Regulus's chest. Regulus twitched his wand just enough to deflect it. The jet bit into the wall, leaving a shallow scorch. "Expelliarmus!" Regulus replied crisply. Hermes ducked and fired an impedimenta. Regulus didn't bother with a shield charm. He leaned back and the spell skimmed past his shoulder. They traded move for counter, each spell precise, each strike aimed at an opening. Yet neither advanced. The pair stood their ground, feet planted, exchanging spells almost conversationally. Their casting was controlled, speed, power, accuracy, each anticipating the other's motions. Nearby, other duos were still in their first rounds, while Regulus and Hermes had already completed 2. Professor Vance watched, his expression troubled. They weren't sparring seriously, they were going through the motions. And yet their motions were far superior to those around them, calibrated and restrained, as if every response had been rehearsed. Vance shook his head, saying nothing. This kind of half-hearted display embarrassed him more than a reckless brawl ever would. Over on the Gryffindor side, the fighting was lively but mediocre. Some students chased their opponents, some were being chased, and some just stood in the middle, unsure who to hit. Professor Vance watched, tempted to shake his head. On the Slytherin side, however, aside from Mulciber and Black, the other duos were performing surprisingly well. Cuthbert and Rosier were guiding the others, and it actually looked decent. Casbert called out instructions while fighting, and Samuel followed his lead. Although his movements were still a little stiff, there was clear progress. It was the same with Rosier's group. That half-blood girl, Costa, was improving fast and had already begun attempting counterattacks. Professor Vance knew Casbert, Rosier, Mulciber, and Black formed a small clique with Black at its center. He knew the Mulciber family's background and had even dealt with them before. Slughorn had also mentioned that this Mulciber had been a troublemaker from the start, openly dabbling in the dark arts his first year. Vance had thought he'd need to keep a close eye on the boy, but looking now, Mulciber was manageable. At least he behaved in class. Vance withdrew his gaze. 10 minutes before the end of class, he tapped the lectern. "Stop." The classroom fell silent. The young students stopped, panting, some wearing expressions that said they wanted more. Professor Vance walked to the center of the room, scanning everyone. Overall, today's performance was very average. He pointed to several Gryffindors. "Mr. Prewitt, your Expelliarmus is too slow. By the time you finish the incantation, your opponent has already knocked you down. Mr. Macmillan, your Impedimenta, where is the impediment? Your opponent didn't even slow down." One by one, he singled out students, pointing out flaws in a serious tone, each criticism landing hard. The students lowered their heads, not daring to speak. At your level, if you truly faced a dark wizard, you wouldn't last a single exchange. You wouldn't even have a chance to run. The room grew quieter. Then Vance looked toward the Slytherin side. "Mr. Casbert, Mr. Rosier, you both did well." Avery straightened, the corners of his mouth curling up. Alex beside him smirked and nodded. Knowing how to guide a partner and how to use the environment, those are things many don't learn even by their 5th year, Vance continued. But don't get ahead of yourselves. You're still far from real combat. Then he looked at Regulus. "Mr. Black." Regulus met his gaze. Vance hesitated, then said, "Come up here. Let's do a demonstration." The classroom erupted. "Black's going to fight the professor? Is this for real? He's only a 2nd year." Regulus stepped out and stood opposite Professor Vance. Since Vance wanted a demonstration, it was hardly appropriate to refuse. The other students fell back to the walls, leaving a cleared space. The two bowed to each other. On the Slytherin side, everyone stared at Regulus. They knew he was powerful, capable of holding his own against 5th years, perhaps even 7th years, but how would he fare against an adult? Against a professor? They were excited and tense with anticipation. On the Gryffindor side, the atmosphere was mixed. Some were curious, some nervous, most hoping to see Regulus mess up. Vance's expression grew serious, though not nervous. He had seen many talented youngsters and knew their limits. "Mr. Black, you first." Regulus didn't bother with ceremony. He raised his wand, but before he cast, he glanced at the professor's magic. Heavy, concentrated, and carrying a sharpness honed through long experience in battle. It felt stronger than many adult wizards' power, though not on the scale of a dean, more like a senior auror. Enough, in other words, for Regulus to test himself. With a flick of his wand, a floor slab near Professor Vance's feet flipped up and lunged for his ankle. Transfiguration. Vance reacted instantly, stepping back. The slab missed and crashed into the wall, shattering. Regulus barked, "Expelliarmus!" A red bolt shot from the tip of his wand at a tricky angle for Vance's chest. Vance flicked his own wand, parrying the bolt, and at the same time the floorboard beneath his feet moved again. The boy wasn't just chaining spells, he was chaining spells with traps. Vance straightened, taking the duel seriously now. "Impedimenta," he called. A purple wall of light surged toward Regulus. Regulus didn't meet it head-on. He dodged aside and pointed his wand at a corner chair. The chair transformed into a sparrow, flapped its wings, and flew straight into the impediment curse. The bird exploded into fragments. The purple wall was neutralized. Vance's eyes narrowed. Using transfiguration to block a spell. Clever. He cast 3 spells in quick succession. Stupefy, Petrificus Talis, Expelliarmus. The spells fired one after another at extreme speed, cutting off Regulus's options. Regulus didn't try to evade. He tapped his wand twice. The first flick parried the Stupefy, the second deflected the Petrificus Totalis, and then he turned his body, letting the Expelliarmus graze past him. At that instant, the wooden tabletop softened and twisted as if alive, a rope erupting from it to coil around Vance's ankle. Vance slashed his wand, snapping the rope, but his rhythm was broken. Regulus seized the gap and flicked his wand. Wingardium Leviosa! A stack of books in the corner rose and shot toward Vance like bricks. Vance swept his wand and knocked them aside, but as he swung, Regulus's Expelliarmus reached him. Vance twisted, the red bolt skimmed his chest and missed. He backed up, re-establishing distance, then countered. Impedimenta! The purple wall returned, larger and faster. Regulus pointed at the floor. A stone slab flipped up to block it. The wall hit the slab exploded, and the spell dissipated. Vance's next spell came, Expelliarmus. Regulus dodged and returned to Stupefy. Vance parried and fired another. The two stood in the middle of the classroom, spells flying back and forth, speed and power escalating. The room was so quiet that only the whine of spells cut the air. The students watched, stunned. This is too fast. I can't even see his wand move. Is Professor Vance actually fighting seriously? Vance cast Stupefy. Regulus didn't dodge. A nearby chair transformed into a cat and leapt up to take the blow. The cat was hit, reverted to a chair, and crashed down. Regulus launched his counterattack. His spells kept the same power, but nearly doubled in speed. Stupefy. The spell zipped toward Vance and was parried. Impedimenta, the professor called. The purple light followed and was dodged. Expelliarmus. The red bolt came hot on the heels of the last. Vance had no time to step aside and raised a shield charm. The red bolt struck the barrier, bursting into light. The shield wavered but held. Vance was forced back a step. That step was visible to everyone. The students gasped. Vance steadied himself and looked at Regulus. Regulus returned the gaze, wand at his side. Vance was silent for a long moment, then sheathed his wand. Enough. Regulus lowered his wand as well. The silence lasted only a second before the room erupted. On the Slytherin side, there were cheers and applause. Whistles and table bangs echoed. Avery turned to Samuel, excitement all over his face, and began explaining. Did you see that? Those last 3 spells were chained. The first forced him to block, the second forced him to dodge, and the third hit when he had no time to react. That's rhythm, do you understand? Samuel stared at the center of the room, nodding without really looking away, his face too absorbed to show anything else. Alex spoke to Lena, too. Look at that cat he made. I never knew transfiguration could be used like that. Lena's eyes shone. So incredible, she breathed. The Gryffindor side was much quieter. A few clapped politely. Most remained silent. Mary McDonald, however, applauded loudly, her claps distinct in the hush. Regulus glanced at her and gave a small nod. Mary smiled and continued clapping. Professor Vance studied Regulus with a complicated expression. He had seen many gifted youngsters, but this boy was different. Throughout the duel, he'd never used any magic beyond the curriculum for a second year. He'd used only standard spells, but at a level far above what was expected. Vance was quiet for a long beat before he said, Mr. Black, your performance is not that of a second year. Regulus bowed slightly. You flatter me, Professor. Vance shot him another look, then addressed the class. See that? That is what a duel is. It isn't standing still and firing spells at each other. Every step must have purpose, and every move must lead to the next. You are all still very far from this level. He added, but you also saw that Mr. Black did it without relying on exotic spells. He used exactly what you've learned. There was genuine pride and respect on the Slytherin side. The Gryffindors were conflicted, but no one could object. Vance checked the time. Mr. Black, 20 points to Slytherin. Regulus bowed again. Vance gathered his things. Class dismissed. The students packed up, many still watching Regulus as he moved. He returned to his seat and picked up his books. Hermes stood nearby waiting for him. Avery came over, still flushed with excitement, Alex trailing behind. The group began heading out together. Lena and Samuel lingered at the back, exchanged a look, and did not follow. Chapter 235, Letting Your Brain Deceive You. Professor Vance's backward step hadn't fazed Regulus. It had been a performative retreat in a spar, nothing more. Neither of them had broken out anything extravagant. Regulus had used only the basic second-year spells he knew, and Vance had restrained himself accordingly. A seasoned professor couldn't very well unleash lethal or advanced combat techniques on a second year. To Vance, this would likely be nothing more than a remark at lunch with Flitwick. That second year from the House of Black is quite good. He actually made me cast a shield charm. Flitwick would probably nod and say, he is indeed talented. Slughorn might lean in with a smile and add, that child has always been outstanding. McGonagall would hum in approval and leave it at that. Among the lower years, though, forcing an upper-year student to raise a shield charm and take a step back would sound exaggerated enough to become legend. They would spread the story and inflate it. Upper-year students would hear the rumors and shrug, just another display from that Black in Slytherin. By the time the gossip reached other houses, it would be, at best, a curiosity, a talented second year showing off. Beyond a little buzz in the younger cohorts and a modest bump to Regulus's reputation, it would simply pass. Regulus didn't dwell on the social aftermath. What kept him thinking was something from Professor Mellos's Defense Against the Dark Arts class last semester, the flash charm. He remembered watching wands cast out red and green orbs and staring at those balls of light. Suddenly questions crowded his mind. Could light carry information? Could information itself be wielded as a weapon? Could one give light a physical form, imbue it with energy, and make it explode? Or could light be assigned symbolic meaning, warmth, resistance to darkness, the power to dispel fear and bring hope? If magic could achieve any of that, then light would be more than illumination. It could be essential in another sense. Where it shone, darkness withdrew, just like what Dumbledore had done from the astronomy tower when a beam of white light dispersed that gray mist. Light felt, to Regulus, like an elemental truth. Civilization itself begins with light. The first spells were probably born around campfires. Light is knowledge. Light is awakening. On the astronomy tower atop the school, his thoughts grew bolder. What if light could be compressed into ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays? Hitting someone with those would not bruise them in a normal sense, but atomic electrons would be stripped away, DNA would break, and wounds would fester unseen. Radiation in the Muggle world, a curse in the Wizarding one. What about destructive interference, using light to cancel itself and vanish inside its own rays? Or turning light into a source of nuclear conditions, temperatures and pressures that force nuclei together, so that the light itself carries annihilating power and simply erases matter where it strikes. The ideas ballooned beyond what he could clearly define. He wasn't sure whether magic could ever reach that far. But the original, more modest idea, using light to carry information, felt practical and worth testing. Physically, light can carry information. It is a wave with three variable properties: amplitude, frequency, and phase, and by altering those, you can encode data. Muggles send more information through a single fiber optic cable per second than could be found in Hogwarts Library's books, because they translate information into light, transmit it, and decode it again. The physics made sense. Magic, however, is not physics. Encoding information into light is one thing. Getting that information into another person's mind is another. There is a missing link, an input port into the brain. The human mind resists chaos, ego, instinctive rejection of foreign inputs. To transmit a complex, coerced, or specific idea, you need a more direct route. He thought of legilimency. Late at night in the restricted section, Regulus stood before a shelf and let his magic extend like invisible tentacles, feeling the imprinted thoughts trapped inside the books. Records of legilimency were scattered among tomes. He skimmed past ancient histories and moral debates to the core description. Legilimency is a deep mental magic that extracts images and information already stored in a target's memory. It acts like a precise key, opening drawers of memory to browse their contents. But extraction is all it does. It cannot write new information out of thin air. If legilimency takes things out, then what he needed was the opposite, to push things in. That would require disguising his information as something already present in the target's mind so it could blend. Light could carry the data, but there must be a conversion that turns abstract information into a format the brain recognizes. Everything legilimency brought out was already translated into a readable format by the caster during extraction. Conversely, if he could translate what he wanted to send into that format and then use light to deliver it, could the receiver's brain accept it as its own thought? To do that would need two things. First, a way to encode information into light. Second, a way to make that light trigger an illusion in the receiver's mind. This is a thought I had myself, when processed by their visual system. Legilimency's mechanics provided a hint. It succeeds because it understands how the mind parses information. If he could discover those rules, he could make the brain deceive itself. Breaking the problem down calmed him. He left the restricted section under a disillusionment charm and flowed through the empty corridors like a night breeze. Torchlight flickered along the stone. Step 1. Prove that light could carry information to another person's eyes. The rest could be tackled afterward. On a Friday night in the room of requirement, spells and curses rattled from other corners, Avery and Alex practicing, and the whistling edge of Hermes's dark arts exercises. Regulus sat in his private space, a ball of light hovering before him. Lumos. Over the past 2 days, he had finished the groundwork for the first 2 stages. Stage 1 was selecting the carrier. He picked Lumos not for power, but because it was the simplest, most stable spell with a visible magical structure and the easiest to modify. He needed a spell that could emit steady, visible light, whose frequency, intensity, and flashing pattern he could control precisely. He spent an afternoon deconstructing and rebuilding it, finally creating an improved Lumos that no longer produced a fixed globe but could flicker, shift color, and flow according to his will, following programmed patterns. In this way, he could encode information, different colors to represent different emotions, brightness levels for intensities, rhythms for logical sequences. Light was now a carrier. Stage 2 was preparing the information itself, and he decided not to start with abstract images or commands. Those would be too complex to convert into light signals. Instead, he would transmit emotions and intentional tendencies. Emotions are closer to legilimency's domain and easier to perceive and verify. He opened the isolation chamber he had built deep in his consciousness during the Dark Enlightenment, an internal containment where a polluted virtual personality had once been locked. Now, with a stronger mind, he created a new quarantined space and synthesized pure extreme emotional samples: unprovoked arrogance, focused contempt, magnified recklessness, raw curiosity, sharp fear. He stripped each sample of any contextual events, so only the core tendency remained. Using spirit and will, he condensed these emotions into stable constructs, pressing a cloud of feeling into something like a stone he could carry in his mind. They wouldn't dissipate or change. He could pull one out whenever needed. Those 2 stages done, he had to fuse them and make the other person's brain accept the input. Regulus studied legilimency again. Its mechanism is a mental channel built by magic, along which the caster probes the target's consciousness, locating and extracting memory images. He needed the reverse, a one-way channel from himself to the target, not one that probed with mental magic, but one that carried light imbued with specific emotional tendencies. That beam could not merely shine, it needed to act like a legilimency probe, identify mental boundaries, establish temporary contact, and pierce shallow defenses, then deposit its wrapped emotional tendency on the surface of the target's consciousness and make it stick. He did not aim for deep implantation or long-term influence yet. Success would be proving that the instant someone came into contact with this particular beam of light, they would display a brief emotional fluctuation or thought tendency corresponding to the encoded sample. That would show the brain had been tricked into processing the incoming signals as its own. To achieve it, he had to take legilimency's methods of mental positioning and connection and integrate them into the modified Lumos, how the magical nodes would align, how 2 different natures of magic could coexist without canceling, how to ensure information integrity at the moment of contact. Problems arose in rapid succession. Each solution opened another technical obstacle. And then he got stuck. Chapter 236, The Kingdom of Aragog. The magic behind legilimency tended toward cold, probing infiltration. Lumos was comparatively neutral and radiative. Forcing them together led either to structural collapse or to nothing more than useless magical detritus. Then Regulus thought of the Patronus. The silver light of a Patronus is the condensation of pure positive feeling. It can dispel a Dementor's despair. In some measure, it is a direct influence upon the emotional realm. That suggested the Patronus had a natural aptitude for intervening in emotions and consciousness. Could it serve as a binding agent? He did not summon a Patronus. Instead, he recalled the texture of that silver light when the starry sky kite had appeared in his mind. Warm without burning, firm without force, with a peculiar penetrative resonance. He tried to pull that quality out as an intermediary layer to sit between legilimency and lumos. When he ran the new structure through his mind, the sluggishness and conflict lessened noticeably. It was far from perfect, but a viable direction had appeared. After several more hours, he sketched a crude, inefficient initial framework. It was enormous, clumsy, ravenous for power, and unstable. To cast it would likely require several seconds of preparation. The light it produced would be unusually conspicuous and would have to strike the target's face for several seconds to stand any chance of working. The effect might last only an instant and likely be negligible. Still, it was usable. Now he had to refine, optimize, and streamline the design until it could be deployed in actual combat. Beyond that lay encoding information, transmitting complex instructions, and exerting long-term influence. Each step would be harder than the last. For the moment, he only needed to know whether the approach worked at all. He needed a test. He discarded the idea of using a young wizard. The initial version was too crude and the risks impossible to control. Ordinary animals in the Forbidden Forest, hares, foxes, owls, lacked the mental complexity to give clear feedback on emotional changes. Werewolves were worse. After transformation, they had no reason at all and would be as useless as a rabbit. The subject had to meet several conditions: a consciousness complex enough to report subtle emotional shifts, a certain degree of mental shielding to test penetrative power, ideally the ability to communicate so he could ask how it felt, and it could not be a young wizard. It had to be remote, so any mishap would be containable. A name popped into his head: Aragog. Aragog the Acromantula, Hagrid's spider. He could speak human language, showed intelligence, possessed significant mental defenses and resistance to conventional mind intrusion, was the leader of a colony, and could command his brood. Best of all, he lived deep in the Forbidden Forest, far from the castle. If anything went wrong, containment would be easy. Regulus's mouth twitched. It would be him. An acromantula is, by ministry classification, an XXXXX level creature, extremely dangerous and illegal to keep. Hagrid hadn't cared for classifications. He'd kept Aragog anyway, worried the spider would be lonely, and even found a female companion from outside called Mozag. Aragog and Mozag had bred, and their offspring had bred, until a whole colony filled that stretch of forest. The webs there were so dense a bird might struggle to fly through. If the centaurs hadn't policed the place, in another few decades it might be called the Spider Forest rather than the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid probably hadn't thought it through. He just pitied Aragog's loneliness. The result was what it was. The first Tuesday of November came cold and early. Wind at the top of the astronomy tower carried the bite of approaching winter. Regulus stood on the battlement, staring across the black lake at the dark silhouette of the Forbidden Forest. At night, the forest crouched like a sleeping beast, silent, deep, full of hidden lives. The moon was a thin crescent. Its light was barely there. The test charm he planned was still raw. The theory was simple enough. Use a specially crafted beam of light to transmit an emotional tendency, arrogance and contempt, to Aragog and observe his response. Theory, however, does not equal practice. No one knew whether, when the beam struck him, Aragog would suddenly feel invincible, or merely irritable, or nothing at all. Regulus needed observation and feedback, and he needed a subject clever enough to handle accidents and remote enough to survive them. He stepped off the battlement. Air rushed under his robes as he fell. After a few meters, his flying charm engaged, and his fall became a forward glide. Like a dark bird, he swept above the castle roofs, skimmed the black lake, and descended toward Hagrid's hut. Near the ground, he tapped his wand to his chest, and the disillusionment charm cloaked him. Light skewed over his body, his heat and magical signature muffled. He landed at the edge of the pumpkin patch as lightly as if on cotton. The hut's windows were dark, muffled snores came from inside. Regulus skirted the building and headed for the forest entrance. The moment he crossed the threshold, the light itself seemed to thin away. The air was damp, the scent of humus thick and clinging. Nocturnal cries punctured the night, short, sharp. He marked their directions and pushed deeper. The path to Aragog's lair was less away than a corridor worn by spider legs. The deeper he walked, the more regular the markings on the ground became. Shallow grooves pressed into fallen leaves by repeated passage, dried mud splatters, faint scratches at the bases of trees. The trees grew taller, the canopy closed above until the sky was almost gone. He needed only a pinprick of light at his fingertip to see his steps. Mist rose around him in layers, thickening until visibility dropped to under 10 meters. The ground softened and sank a little underfoot. Spiderwebs began to appear, sparse at first, then denser and larger. The clicking of rubbing chelicerae reached his ears, at first isolated, then swelling into a surrounding chorus. He had entered the colony's active zone, the warning ring. The path sloped down. The mist here clung like fabric. It would not disperse. After passing a final stand of twisted trees draped in heavy silk, a vast hollow yawned at his feet. It looked as if a meteor had struck. Over 100 meters across, steep-edged trees cleared away. The ground was covered in a ghastly white mat, years of woven silk and rotting leaves. At the center lay a colossal hemispherical nest of interlaced silk, like a giant egg. Its surface was pocked with holes. Small to medium black-haired spiders scuttled in and out. A permanent mist steamed from the hollow, thick with the odor of spider secretions. This was Aragog's kingdom. Regulus perched on a projecting rock and spread his magic perception. From the nest's heart rose a dark, powerful magical aura like a predator's torch, Aragog himself. Nearby, a slightly weaker but still striking aura carried a colder, nurturing note, Mozag. He did not linger. He slid down the slope and stepped into the hollow. The silk underfoot was sticky and gave a little with each step. He passed patrolling and web-repairing spiders. The largest were as big as hunting dogs, the smallest as large as house cats. Their compound eyes reflected the bland mist. They did not notice him. The nest's interior was more cavernous than it had appeared outside, a complex labyrinth of gray-white silk. He let the disillusionment charm fall away and revealed himself. Clicking erupted from all directions, quick, dense, urgent with threat. Eyes behind shadowed web screens turned toward him. In the nest's relatively open center, the ground was padded with a thick, velvet-like compression. Aragog's massive body rested there, supported by 8 tree-trunk-thick legs bristling with coarse black hairs. His 2 foremost legs were slightly raised. His giant chelicera hung half open, the inner walls barbed and dark red. 8 simple eyes shone a milky light in 2 rows. The topmost pair were largest, unblinking and fixed upon Regulus. In the shadows behind Aragog, a slightly smaller female with a swollen abdomen slowly lifted her forebody. Her legs shifted restlessly, rubbing and rustling. Her eyes, too, were locked on him, radiating hostile watchfulness. "Wizard," Aragog rumbled, his voice low and thick as rocks grinding together, each syllable resonant. "You should not be here. Has no one taught you the rules? The forbidden forest at night belongs to its residents." Regulus did not move. He scanned Aragog, then Mozag, then the adult spiders emerging from the webs and shadows to half-encircle him, each the size of a pony, chelicerae snapping with intimidating clicks. "I've come tonight because I'd like to ask for your help with an experiment," he said evenly, his voice unusually clear in the open nest. He said please, though the request itself was hardly polite. Since Aragog had agreed to speak, Regulus would negotiate. He was also quietly curious about Aragog himself. Experiment? Aragog's top eyes narrowed, his chelicerae snapped fully open, barbs bristling. He stamped his front legs on the velvet-like ground, sending a shiver through nearby silk strands. "Using my people? For an experiment?" Chapter 237, The Wisdom of Aragog. To Regulus, Aragog's show of rage wasn't just a bluff, but it wasn't especially impressive either. The Ministry of Magic classed Acromantula as XXXXX, extremely dangerous, and for good reason. Still, to Regulus, a spider was a spider. Numbers meant nothing. Spiders feared fire, and fiend fire even more. From another angle, a larger number could be an advantage. For magical experiments or for the ingredients they provided, more was better. Acromantula venom was a rare potion ingredient. Professor Slughorn placed it with phoenix tail feathers, one of those scarce materials you needed connections to obtain. Last Christmas, the family's potion shop manager had told him African acromantula venom had become 30% more expensive than the year before. A pint of good venom could be worth 100 galleons. The ministry classified it a Class C non-tradable item, meaning legal trade was almost non-existent. It circulated only on the black market. Regulus remained composed. "No, Aragog," he said. "You've got me wrong." Aragog's raised forelegs froze. Its 8 legs hung motionless. The row of eyes above shifted, an expression of confusion passing across them. On a normal-sized spider, that face might have been comical, but on a creature this large with thick chelicerae, the look was menacing. Regulus met those 8 eyes calmly. "It is you I need, Aragog," he said, "to cooperate with my experiments, not your kin." The air in the lair seemed to be drawn tight. Aragog's chelicerae gaped, revealing the dark red inner walls bristling with rows of barbs like 2 sets of interlocking spears. It thudded its front legs onto the velvet-like ground, and the thick silk pillars around them trembled, beads of dew scattered from the webs. Still, it did not lunge. This was a spider that had been raised by Hagrid. When it had been kept in Hagrid's cupboard, it had watched the robed figures from the castle go by. Some gentle as a spring breeze, others sharp as knives, and some heavy as shifting stone, making the spider silk shudder even from afar. It knew that those people could crush it and its colony with a flick. It knew this young wizard had come from that place, Hogwarts. Tearing apart some wandering wizard who had stumbled into the Forbidden Forest was one thing. Killing a wizard from that castle was quite another. Hagrid's face and the vague but powerful figures of the professors had become an invisible restraint in its violent mind. The restraint was thin, however. Regulus's words, blunt and dismissive, treated Aragog, the lord of the Acromantula, as if he were an ordinary creature to be ordered. Anger flared, red light flickering in the compound eyes. Yet Aragog's hard-earned caution overruled the urge to kill. It also understood what it meant that a wizardling could walk up to its lair and then reveal himself. That was not mere boldness. Too many things in the Forbidden Forest could claim his life. For a cub to cross half the forest, pass the perimeter, thread the mist and the webs, and stand in Aragog's den alive meant he must have been certain from the first step that he would not be harmed. The spider's instinct, sharpened by decades of survival, screeched a warning. The young wizard standing there was dangerous. It felt like the edge of an abyss. The body knew one more step could be fatal. So Aragog chose to speak rather than strike. "We are XXXX, extremely dangerous, able to speak, intelligent," it said, "but we also eat meat, human flesh too." Its 2 front legs bent, its weight shifted, and its immense head leaned forward until its compound eyes were almost level with Regulus's face. "Hagrid restrains me, and I restrain my colony from attacking young wizards who wander into the Forbidden Forest." Regulus's expression showed the faintest hint of amusement. "That does not give you the right to break into my lair in the middle of the night, boss me around, and demand I cooperate with your experiments." He did not say more, but his raised eyebrows betrayed his interest. That Aragog had mentioned Hagrid of its own accord was telling, and it hadn't sounded like a bluff. If the spider had wanted to use Hagrid's name to intimidate him, it could have done so from the start. Bringing Hagrid up now read more like a signal. "I'm connected to your people, so don't go too far." Or put another way, "I'm only not tearing you apart because of Hagrid." Regulus's mind clicked. He had called the creature by name the moment he appeared, Aragog. The name wasn't secret, but few knew it. At Hogwarts, likely only Hagrid and a handful of professors did. Was the spider testing him, exchanging a code to see if he was one of theirs? "Do you know Hagrid?" he asked. "Where did you hear about me? Whose side are you on?" When Regulus didn't react to the mention of Hagrid, neither seeking rapport nor showing any sign of being alarmed, Aragog's suspicion eased. Its massive body moved forward, 8 legs alternating, casting a shadow that almost swallowed Regulus. The colony tightened its circle. The click of chelicerae snapped around him like a rainstorm on stone. Its many eyes looked down. "Young wizard, you have great courage," it said. The row of compound eyes mirrored a tiny Regulus at their center, 8 identical reflections. Aragog tapped its front right leg on the ground with a dull thud. Or you are very foolish. Do you think because you could follow the trail, you're qualified to make demands? It said. My webs cover the hollow, each connected to the lair. From the first step you took, I knew something had entered. It paused. I did not let them attack right away. I wanted to see what kind of creature would be so bold. Regulus answered evenly. I know your webs act as an early warning, and I know you didn't attack right away. That's why I'm standing here speaking with my mouth, not with my 19. He looked up at the highest pair of eyes. In fact, you should thank yourself. He made no more moves. His 18 was perfectly restrained, without a trace. Aragog's front right leg, poised for a strike, hung in the air. The claw trembled, unsure whether to land or pull back. It was as if a torch had been brought close during hibernation. Before it felt heat, its whole body already knew to dodge. The young wizard had displayed nothing, yet Aragog's muscles would not obey. Slowly it closed its chelicerae, retracting the barbs, and lowered the raised leg until it rested softly on the velvet floor. It clicked once, and the surrounding spiders, as if by command, drew back into a looser ring. A few slow ones were nudged by companions before they followed. Regulus watched, amused. He had shown nothing, his AT exactly contained, yet the giant spider behaved with an odd, almost uncanny intuition. Spider instinct, he thought wryly. The expression of doubt and deliberation in Aragog's compound eyes was unmistakable. This was no mere reflex. The acromantula could communicate, weigh options, assess a situation, and even use Hagrid's name to draw a line and probe for truth. Deep in the lair, Mozag lay with her legs curled, chelicerae closed, eyes half-lidded in a sleepy vigilance. She did not understand what had happened, only that danger lingered. Regulus withdrew his gaze. This kind of intelligence was not innate but nurtured. Hagrid's influence on magical creatures was unreasonably effective, raising an acromantula from cub to adult, teaching it to fear but respect wizards, and having it restrain its own colony. Those were results perhaps no ordinary professor could claim. In talent with creatures, Hagrid would rank high anywhere, though the world mostly saw him as a big man with odd hobbies. Aragog fell silent for a long time. The light in its many eyes flickered as it thought. Its chelicerae clicked now and then, but there was no sign of attack. Regulus did not hurry it. It was a novelty, after all, to carry on a civil conversation with a creature so utterly non-humanoid, and Aragog's behavior was not at all what he had expected. Regulus had originally planned to let Aragog make the first move, then move straight into the experiment. Provoke it, let it lunge, and show it that lunging was useless. That would be less trouble and more like how an acromantula would behave. But Aragog's intelligence overrode its instinctive violence, and the confrontation that should have exploded immediately instead became this cautious back and forth. Since it could speak, Regulus didn't mind taking a little longer. If the experiment worked, he would want Aragog to describe its experience in its own words. An Aragog willing to cooperate and able to explain itself was far better than a captive seething with hatred after being subdued. At last, Aragog spoke again. Its voice was lower, its chelicerae closing and opening as it shifted its weight back. I think I know why you came. I have intelligence, I can communicate, and I have strong magical resistance. Its 8 compound eyes stared unblinkingly at Regulus. In each eye he saw his own small reflection, arranged like 8 little mirrors, moving with the tilt of its head. Regulus nodded. That's right. Aragog's enormous, hideous head took on a strange seriousness. It fell silent for a moment, then, with a tone that somehow suggested debate and an odd sincerity, absurd in a spider, and yet real, said, "But I have a question." Regulus raised a hand to invite it on. "Go ahead. Why don't you look for a centaur?" The question stopped Regulus cold. He had never considered a centaur. From the moment he conceived this experiment, what had appeared in his mind was an acromantula, Aragog, an intelligent, talkative giant spider in the Forbidden Forest. Perfect. Centaurs had never been an option. Perhaps subconsciously he had decided dealing with a band of stargazing, fate-predicting centaurs would be more trouble than negotiating with a group of predators who, dangerous as they were, had clearer objectives. But as Aragog's question sank in, Regulus realized a centaur would indeed be more suitable, more intelligent, better at communicating, stronger in magic resistance, and clearer in feedback. They were also in the Forbidden Forest, roughly the same distance from the castle. He had simply not thought of it. "You're right," he admitted after a moment. "I didn't think of it." Aragog regarded him. Regulus noticed different things reflected in those 8 eyes: speechlessness, shock, vigilance, confusion, hesitation, curiosity, exhaustion. He let the topic drop. Aragog's chalicery opened and closed with nervous clicking. "The experiment," it asked, lowering its voice. "What kind of magic?" Before Regulus could answer, it added, "Must it be me?" Regulus considered. It didn't have to be Aragog. Only an intelligent, communicative specimen was required. If Aragog was reluctant, he could try another spider. The interaction so far had been smooth, though, and there was no need to force anything. Letting Aragog feel at ease would make later cooperation easier. "It doesn't have to be you," he said, "but it needs to be intelligent enough to communicate clearly and to understand and express its feelings." Aragog relaxed as if releasing a breath. "What kind of magic? Will there be harm?" "Theoretically, no." Regulus nodded. The spider's tone softened. It was reasonable and easy to talk to. The precise nature of the magic needn't be explained. This wasn't some simple charm, but a new line of inquiry with potential for assistance or control, and it couldn't be discussed casually. Not even with a creature nearly cut off from wizarding society. He would also need to take steps afterwards to ensure Aragog couldn't blurt out that a wizard had come that night. Hagrid's big mouth was not to be trusted. Regulus pictured Hagrid hearing, in a casual conversation, "A little wizard in school robes came to me at night to try a strange magic experiment," and then Dumbledore hearing of it 2 days later. It wasn't that he feared trouble so much as the risk of overthinking. Aragog didn't press further. It sat quietly, chalicery making faint clicks, while the surrounding spiders stirred. One particularly large, glossy black spider pushed forward. It was larger than most adults, its legs heavy and powerful, with thick chalicery and unusually bright compound eyes. It lowered its front half in a submissive posture in front of Aragog. "This is Baruch," Aragog said in a dull voice. "The smartest of my offspring. He has strong magical resistance as well. He will cooperate." Baruch tapped the ground lightly with a front leg in greeting, making a crisp noise. Its 8 eyes focused on Regulus without hostility. Regulus even detected curiosity. He inclined his head toward Baruch, then turned back to Aragog with politeness. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Aragog replied. "If Baruch suffers any harm it cannot bear, the experiment stops immediately. And you owe me one, and you owe me an explanation for why you thought you could do this." "Reasonable." Regulus had no objection. He turned to Baruch, raised his wand, and said, "Are you ready? It's just a beam of light. Just watch." Baruch clicked affirmation and adjusted its body to face Regulus fully, all 8 eyes trained on the wand tip. Regulus let his magic flow. A tiny ball of silver-white light appeared at the tip of his wand, faint like a firefly, and then steadied into a soft, non-dazzling glow. The ball began to shift, silver-white to warm yellow to pale gold, then back to silver-white. Rhythm and brightness subtly changed, as if something flowed within. Those indistinct changes corresponded to precise parameters in Regulus's mind. He drew on a prepared emotional template, a blend of arrogance and contempt, and translated it into a modulation pattern of light. Frequency shifts mapped to intensity, brightness rhythms mapped to emotional valence. Everything was orchestrated by his will and magic. He aimed the beam, carrying that specific pattern, at the central pair of compound eyes in Baruch's row, the pair best suited for perception, and let it wash over the spider's jet-black carapace and pearl-white eyes. 3 seconds passed. Baruch's body abruptly tensed. All 8 legs stiffened, joints rubbing faintly. The front legs lifted slightly, claws hanging in the air. Its chalicery opened and then snapped shut with a sharp click. A burst of short, high-pitched clicks erupted from its mouth, rapid, metallic, and edged with agitation and disdain. It turned its head, and instead of continuing to stare at the wand, began to scan the other spiders with exaggerated haughtiness. When it looked over its kin, its posture and sounds broadcast an unmistakable message: "Everyone here is beneath me." Even without understanding spider speech, the contempt was plain. scrutinizing, sizing up, reevaluating every spider nearby. In its top row of eyes, the left gleamed with fastidiousness, the right with scorn. Together they read, "Are you even worthy to stand with me?" Aragog's top pair of massive compound eyes widened, fixed on the suddenly changed Baruch. Mozog hissed uneasily and curled in, legs folding protectively over its abdomen. The surrounding spiders grew restless. Clicking became chaotic, some questioning, some provocative, some bewildered. A few less intelligent spiders felt affronted, raising front legs and moving toward Baruch, with chelicerae opening and closing in a merged staccato. Aragog let out a short, sharp click. The advancing spiders halted and slunk back into place. A couple retreated so fast they bumped and rolled into one another. For about 10 seconds, the forest hummed with tension. Then Baruch's high-pitched clicking ceased. Its body swayed as if recovering from dizziness. The raised legs dropped back to the ground, paws touching with a slight unsteadiness. Its chelicerae slowly closed with a final click. The spider lowered its head to look at its own mouthparts, then raised it and stared at Regulus. Confusion filled its 8 eyes, layered over a remnant of arrogance that was quickly fading into bewilderment. Regulus extinguished the light at the tip of his wand. "How do you feel?" he asked.